Good morning. Today is Tuesday, August 27, 2019, regular meeting of the Lane County Board of Commissioners. And because we have a number of people we're going to be honoring, I'd like to jump right to the public comment and call people in the order in which they have signed up. Dave Piccioni, please come forward, followed by Pamela Kraus, followed by Martha Bryson. So, Mr. Piccioni, please come forward. Okay. Well, unfortunately, people put their names below yours.
It's about habitat for animals and people? Is that what we're talking about?
We will be calling on you now to give your name
Dave,
and your where you live. And then our vice chair will give you 3 minutes. You can present on any topic you wish.
Okay, all right. Well, my name is Dave Piccioni. I live on Van Buren and 6, between 6th and 7th. And as far as I heard, the meeting today is about preserving our habitat. And so it is indicative that we're losing our habitat if other species are dwindling down in the number of population that they usually had, 200 years ago or so. So they call them keystone species because if they're gone, we're gone. Okay, well, I don't know. I just figure we should kind of like keep an eye on the population of animals and plants that we have, and that'll give us an indication of how well we are managing our environment. So I guess that's what I got to offer today. So thank you.
Thank you very much. We have Pamela Kraus, and please come forward, Ms. Kraus. And same instructions. Our vice chair will, after you give your name and address, our vice chair will give you 3 minutes. You can glance over at the, you just glance over at those 3 colors there, and you'll see where she starts your timer, and then there's a 30 seconds when the yellow. Welcome.
Thank you. My name is Pamela Kraus. I live in Springfield. I will say one comment about I'm in support of investigating and hopefully examining and maybe producing a $50 million housing bond. Mostly I'm here today to talk about an outfit that operates in Lane County called Lane Transit District. I now have my second significant injury in 7 months because of poor operation of a ramp by operators. When I am injured by LTD, they tell me they don't have insurance for personal injury. I know I have to proceed with this on a state level, and I will be doing that with the state senator. This is horrible. I don't like my life derailed by someone's incompetence. And it's insulting to be told they don't have insurance. Are they the only vehicles on the road that don't? I don't like my life derailed. I'm in pain. This is obnoxious, and please be aware, I have seen seniors repeatedly injured on the bus. They don't like to admit they're frail and vulnerable, so when they're asked, do you want medical care, they always say no, and Lane Transit just goes on. I want you to know what's happening here in Lane County with Lane Transit District, and if anyone can help me with proceeding with this, please do so. Thank you.
Thank you. Martha Bryson, welcome, Ms. Bryson. And looks like you can use that microphone right there in front of you.
I brought my own timer.
Good.
I want to talk to you today about our need for housing here in Lane County. Some are giving me flack for urging you to consider putting together an initiative for a housing bond, saying they won't support this until they see the details, what the housing per unit will be, the cost per housing unit will be to construct, not trusting the developers who inflate costs, how affordable the rent will be on such housing, etc. My response has been that we need to convince you commissioners we desperately need more housing, specifically income-based affordable housing. I am being told I'm wasting my time because surely you already know how badly more housing is needed. I'm here today to make sure you do know why we need more housing. We all see the homeless on the street and know they need housing. By the way, the coordinated entry system the county uses by definition only serves the most vulnerable. But I do not meet the screening criteria to access rent subsidies or any other program currently in place in Lane County. There are thousands of us who are the invisible homeless, who need affordable housing, not because we don't have income, but because the regular rental market is priced out of our budgets, and we are not poor enough to qualify for programs through the Housing Authority or St. Vincent de Paul. Let's talk affordability. Tax credit rental properties are generally priced below the overinflated regular rental market and are still not affordable for those of us on a fixed income without also having a Section 8 voucher or some other rental subsidy program that currently we do not have in place here. Let's talk Section 8. The Housing Authority has decided to sell 112 single-family dwellings, publicly owned and scattered throughout the area. They are selling these properties to use the money to build more housing. The first 12 sold, and because those families were displaced by the Housing Authority, these families were income eligible for and received Section 8 vouchers. After months of trying to find affordable housing in the regular rental market, they couldn't find replacement housing they could afford, even with the vouchers. Every rental was priced too high for their budgets, and the vouchers were returned unused to the Housing Authority. Now let's talk about the need for housing for those of us who are disabled and/or elderly, who live on a fixed budget. There is no housing in the regular rental market I can afford, and the rents keep rising. And now there are new barriers in place, such as one needs a credit score of 600 or better to even apply, in addition to having 3 times the rent amount in income. I lost my housing 2 years ago and applied for every vacancy I could find that were ground floor units. Some complexes said they hadn't had a ground floor vacancy in 4 or 5 years. Some property management companies wouldn't tell me if a vacant unit was on the ground floor, even after I told them I'm in a wheelchair. I'll skip the next part. I'll be coming back again and again until I've told you all the stories about people who need housing, to make sure you know how bad our housing crisis really is.
Thank you very much for your public comment today.
My name is Martha Bryson, and I live at 1350 Charnelton, Apartment 1. I was housed 3 weeks ago.
Thank you. So is there anyone who has not signed up for public comment that wishes to give public comment today? Okay, seeing none. Do commissioners want to do their remonstrances now or wait until we've done our, honor our employee recognition? You can do it now. Go for it.
Thank you for all of you that spoke. And since 2 of you were speaking about the housing bond, I know that we at the county have been working on housing issues. So, Administrator, where are we on our housing plans?
We, Mr. Chair and Commissioner Buck, the board has identified a strategic goal in your current strategic plan to develop a multi-jurisdictional affordable housing plan. So that is a goal that we've been working on. To further that effort, we've been working with Better Housing Together to develop a contract where they can put together an action plan, a roadmap for us through what is likely to be a 6 to 9 month process, and collaborating with various cities across the county, as well as other stakeholder partners in the community, to look at, where do we have strengths, where do we have opportunities and weaknesses, what are the constraints that exist, and really what is the role of the county as it relates to solving the housing crisis? Because there are many governmental agencies throughout our community that have responsibility on that front. The county is one of those. Obviously, we cannot fix all of the challenges, but if we're working together in collaboration, we can make a significant impact. So we met yesterday. Judy Williams and I met with Karen Knudsen and Betsy Schultz from Better Housing Together to talk about that. And we're in the final stages of executing an agreement with Better Housing Together to develop that action plan. We anticipate and we're planning for a kickoff meeting with the Board of Commissioners. It'll be a public meeting in late September, early October. So that would be the next step. And then our goal is to have that action plan completed in time for, in advance of the proposed budget for 2020-21, which would be May of 2020. So our goal is to try to get that wrapped up around the March-April timeframe of 2020.
And will that analysis include contemplation of a potential bond amongst other things?
I would well, it's certainly going to look at the revenue, the required funding for investments in various housing that are needed. So there are a number of things that will be looked at, things like our land use codes and the extent to which there are regulations in place that make it more difficult to construct low-income affordable housing in the community. And funding will absolutely be a part of that. We had the conversation yesterday about this concept of a bond proposal. I think one of the, some of the feedback that we've received from the experts that are working on this issue through Better Housing Together is there's a lot of analysis and work that needs to be done before we jump to putting a proposal in front of the voters. Are we talking about funding for permanent supportive housing that the county would contract for? Are we talking about a revolving loan type fund for private developers where we're incentivizing certain low-income housing? So there's a lot of work that we would want to do to make sure that any complex bonding proposal actually has a lot of thought behind how those resources would be spent to have the greatest impact for the community.
Great. And I look forward to that kickoff, and I hope that you all can join us too, since it will be a public meeting. Thank you for indulging me, Chair.
Okay. Commissioner Farr?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Bryson, you're not wasting your time. So come and speak as often as you will, because as much as you talk, there are that many things to respond to. And as it says in the Old Testament book of Ecclesiastes, the more you know, the more trouble you get by the situation. Knowledge creates worry. And the more we hear, the more worried we get. However, it also prompts us to action. I was first appointed to the Human Services Commission in 1995 by Ruth Bascom, and we were all wringing our hands then, and we were all worried then. And here we are, 25 years later, still worried about it, because there's a new set of worries. So please continue your dialogue and continue presenting information to us. And things that you state to us, if you present them in writing also, that can go into a file where we can refer back to them. So thank you for being here for that. And Ms. Kraus, LTD. I spent 6 years on Metropolitan Policy Commission, MPC. I'm no longer on that. I was taken off of that commission. But that's a good place to give testimony such as the one that you just gave, because LTD has representation on MPC, and I believe they still meet on the third Thursday of each month, quite often in Springfield, sometimes at the Bascom-Tyson Room. Great place to present that testimony. And David, always good to hear you. Mr. Chair, I have some more things to talk about, but in respect for the people waiting to be honored, I'll wait until the end of the meeting today.
Okay. Anyone else? Commissioner Bozovich, then Commissioner Bernie.
Thank you. So I just real quick want to address Ms. Kraus. The LTD board is really the first place to start at, if you can. Their board of directors is meeting multiple times in the coming month. That I think you may be able to grab somebody's ear, but September 3rd, they've got a strategic planning meeting, committee meeting. They've got a finance committee meeting on the 9th. and they've got a Board of Directors work session on the 16th, and their regular board meeting is on the 18th. Yeah, and I do understand that quite often government agencies are insured, basically through the state, but there should be some way of filing a claim. And if not, maybe it's time to maybe talk to some folks in the legal aid for Lane County and file that claim, because I know folks file claims against Lane County consistently, whether it's they got paint on their car while we were striping a road, or a rock fell off of one of our dump trucks and broke their windshield. And we deal with those claims on an individual basis, and quite often we settle them very quickly. So I'm a little surprised to hear that you got such a brush off from LTD, but one of the places to start is with the board that's appointed by the governor, and then the governor's office that actually appoints that board. So I don't know if there's an ombudsman with the governor's office that you might be able to get a hold of and bring them to. But it's really sad to hear that there are injuries being caused. I know my wife suffered an injury in New Orleans on their public transit, and never was able to get compensated for it. So it's keep trying. And unfortunately, the one person that was on LTD's board that I knew really well is no longer serving, Gary Wildish. So I'll see if I can get a hold of other board members if I can, but just to kind of bring it to their attention that maybe this is something they ought to look at, maybe impress upon AJ to look at training for the drivers, a little bit more training. So hopefully you get what you want out of this. So I apologize. Quite often people think Lane County LTD are kind of tied together, and we're not. And I think it sounds like you're aware of that because you mentioned it's a state issue. But it's kind of sad when people are being injured in public transit. I know from experience, of basically a maintenance issue that caused an injury to my wife's ankle, and she had to deal with it. We paid for all of the insurance and everything because we couldn't get the New Orleans public transit system to even acknowledge they had a problem.
Good morning, Pamela. It's nice to see you, although I'm sorry it's under this circumstance. And the first thing that came to my head was I hope this didn't occur when I was going to give you a ride the other evening. Well, I mean, how could I not think that? Okay. Also, we're from Springfield, and Springfield City Council person Sherry Moore is the chair of the LTD Strategic Planning Group, which is meeting September 3rd at 5:30. So that might be a place to start too. But I wish, what can we say? Regarding housing, let me just suggest this. As but one of 5 commissioners, I will work diligently to make sure that there is a bond, or that we figure out resources as quickly as possible to say, I would imagine you would get as frustrated as I sometimes get in other situations when the answer to the question is, well, we'll have a plan in a year. I would appreciate that. Meanwhile, there are needs, and people are building, and it's not enough, and there are rentals, but they're not enough, and there are Section 8 vouchers, and they're not even close to enough, and there is LIHEAP, low-income energy assistance programs, and it's a fraction of enough. I mean, this is the environment that we're in. But I would caution, and I would caution, don't create confusion and distraction around the fact that we recognize and are going to act as quickly as we prudently can to try and deal with this problem. As someone who's developed, not that this is a lot, but 180 low-income housing units in the late 70s when we had a different administration and we had resources for local low-income housing programs. The one I developed in were not that anyone cares, but it was the Farmers Home Administration's Rural Rental Housing Section 515 loan program. And these issues relate, the biggest issue is federal resources, state resources, how we structure them, and the degree to which, sir, people are misquoting me already in terms of what I have said about this is that's called confusion. And to the degree one rustles up lots of emotion around something because it's real, that's conflicting, that creates division amongst people that are on the same page. We are on the same page. We are going to move forward as best we can in an environment where we all are dealing with crumbs, and crumbs aren't worth fighting over. Crumbs are worth generating more resource from. So we're with you 100% of the way, and we're going to do as best we can, as quickly as we can. And I just wanted to let you know that.
Thank you very much. I'll just take a few minutes to address some of the public comments. First of all, Mr. Piccioni, feel free to come back and use your public comment time. As far as what's on our agenda on any given week, you can always look on our public agenda that's on the internet that has a complete listing of not only what we're going to be talking about, but all the background papers that the people who are planning to talk that day have submitted. So there's a great deal of information on the internet, and it's usually posted on Thursday before our following Tuesday meeting. So most of the stuff, and in fact, I might even say all the stuff so far that we're going to be discussing today has been posted since Thursday of last week. So that's one way to keep up with the volume of work that's coming before us, and it's a lot. With regard to the LTD and the injury, first of all, years ago, I used to volunteer with the Senior Law Service, and it's a program of Lane County Legal Aid to allow seniors, and usually there's a no income test for this, and they meet at like the Kaufman Center or other places on a Saturday. That's always a good place to go for some free legal help. In terms of what you've been told in terms of no insurance, that may be true that Lane Transit District doesn't have insurance because Lane County doesn't have insurance. Lane County has self-insurance, and we have a policy for very, very large claims that kicks in, but we have insurance, self-insurance, so it may be true they don't have insurance, but they have self-insurance. And another thing is, there's something called a tort claim notice that when people have a claim against a government entity that's under the state of Oregon, like counties, cities, special districts, they have to give notice, written notice of their claim. It's called a tort claim notice. So don't forget to ask legal aid or your own lawyer about that. And in terms of the policy issue of maybe mistakes that are made or routinely made or injuries that are routinely, and you're kind of getting into the policy end of things, I agree going to the LTD board meetings is good. I also agree that on the Metropolitan Policy Committee, which LTD is a member of, which Lane County is a member of, Commissioner Burney and I are slated to be at the September 5 meeting of the Metropolitan Policy Committee, Thursday, September 5, 11:30 at the Springfield Justice Center. So those are some opportunities for you. Now, in terms of the housing bond, as distinct from everything else that's related to housing, there's the Housing Policy Board, there's the Poverty and Homelessness Board, there's the work that Homes for Good is doing. There's the work that Mr. Mokrzycki mentioned in conjunction with our partnership with other organizations. My focus on this housing bond would be that public comment came forward and said, hey, you should think about doing a housing bond. And the board said, okay, we'll do a work session on a housing bond. And my goal isn't really to construct that housing bond. My goal is to let the people that know more about housing than I do come up with a proposal on how to spend that money. My concern, and this is what I would encourage you to do and the board too, is to focus on the public's willingness to tax themselves for the purposes of housing. And if they're not willing to do it, then let's don't ask them. But if they are willing to do it, let's try to figure out what is the amount of money. And our goal really here is, because you can think about all these other entities, City of Eugene, City of Cottage Grove, Metropolitan Policy Committee, the Homes for Good, all these different groups, St. Vincent de Paul, none of them have the authority to put a housing bond in front of the voters countywide, except us. So the focus here, I think, should be on not how do we spend that money. If we got it, we can leave that up to some other folks that are integrating all this and learning about it. But our focus should be on getting some decent public opinion surveys so that we have a trajectory, so we have a history of doing a couple of these so that we can find out whether we're just spitting in the wind or not, and whether or not there's really something here to talk about. So that would be my focus when we get that housing bond discussion here, is not really what's going to be in the housing bond, because we're too premature on that. But I want to get started with public opinion assessment of it. So that's my take on that. Now, it's my distinct privilege as board chair to move to item 5 on our agenda, and that is our employee recognition. And I'd like to recognize our county administrator, Mr. Mokohiski, to go over the people we are honoring today. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Really excited about, we have 4 individuals we're going to recognize today, and very excited about this. Before we start bringing folks up, I want to just take the opportunity to reflect on our ongoing efforts to create a culture of leadership in Lane County. And what do we mean by a culture of leadership? We can start, I think, by defining what leadership is not. It's not the size of the budget that you manage or the number of employees that you supervise or the complexity of projects that you oversee. But leadership in its true sense is an individual's ability to compel others to find solutions to challenges that we face. And so these 4 people we're going to recognize epitomize that. True leaders in the organization, not because of the projects or their daily responsibility, but what they've done to bring forward solutions and work with others. We've also had a lot of conversation. I think these are great examples that you're going to see today. Talked a lot about clearly defining the roles and responsibilities in our organization. The role of management being to the role of the board to define the priorities and the results that we want to see, management to implement that and to make sure that we're meeting those results, and to create an environment where employees can have the freedom and flexibility to find creative and innovative solutions. And I'm just really excited because I've seen more and more of these employee recognitions that we're doing are not just for individuals who are doing incredible work in their sphere of influence. It's really for their efforts to step out of their daily responsibility and do something unique and special to solve a challenge that we're facing. So with that, I just wanted to kind of paint that picture. We typically jump into these recognitions, but I think it's important just to reflect on, it's not just great people that are doing great work, it's the culture that we're creating here that allows great individuals to step up and do great work. So first, I want to invite Christina Doolittle and Matt Taylor from Parole and Probation, along with Donovan Dumeier and Greg, if you can grab another seat, Greg Rickoff, to come on up here and sit with us. And Christina Doolittle and Matt Taylor are parole officers in our Parole and Probation Department. And they brought forward a proposal a few years ago to become more involved in collaborating with the Florence Police Department during the annual Rhododendron Festival. The practice has had a positive effect as both a law enforcement tool as well as a way of strengthening our relationship between parole and probation and coastal partners. You know, we oftentimes hear this west of the tunnel concern that folks on the coast don't feel that the county is always there supporting and providing services and partnering with them. And this is a great example of this team stepping forward and finding a way to better engage with our coastal partners. So during the event, Officers Doolittle and Taylor focused on improving community safety by proactively connecting with clients in the area, including home visits to sex offenders. They also served as a positive element for the public during the event, answering questions about their work and role in community safety. This is something, you know, many folks in the community are familiar with what a deputy or a police officer does or what a district attorney may do, but sometimes the role of a parole and probation officer is somewhat obscure, but it's hugely important in supervising individuals that are on supervision and maintaining community safety. And both that dual law enforcement role as well as that human service, social service aspect of getting people back into a stable condition in our community. Some of their assistance to other agencies came in the form of traffic control during the parade and assistance directing pedestrians and traffic during a medical emergency. So just a few statistics for you. Their efforts this year alone included 8 arrests, 9 seized contraband, 30 attempted home visits, 18 of which were completed, 14 assists to other agencies, 24 field contacts with clients, and 8 searches. And so this is just, it's a great partnership. It's a great way you can see on multiple levels for us to add value in terms of community safety and to lift up the understanding of the role and importance of parole and probation in our community. So we want to thank Officers Doolittle and Taylor for their outstanding work every day, but particularly for your efforts to lead in the partnership with our coastal partners. And I want to offer if Greg or Donovan have anything that they want to add.
Yes. Good morning, Chair, Vice Chair, Commissioners. It's an honor to be here. It's an honor to work with Officer Taylor and Doolittle, Officers Taylor, Doolittle. One of the things that I would just like to say is both these officers are incredibly competent, committed, and have brought incredible collaboration to not only the city of Florence, but to Veneta. And in those partnerships and expanding those roles, we've actually opened doors for not only bringing services to help those in need in those communities, but we've also been given and provided resources as well. So increased jail capacity in Florence at a relatively low cost, just as a result of the strong partnership that has been developed by these two fine professionals. So it's an honor to work with them daily, and it's a privilege to be here to talk about them and share just a little with you about them. Thank you.
Chair Sorensen, Commissioners, thank you very much for this time. Just very quickly, this came forward as a proposal from the officers. What I appreciated about that proposal was it was not only examining the core of their work and making a very reasoned argument of how it would be valuable to parole and probation and their work as officers, they did make the case for improving relations and continuing to engage multiple partners on the coast. So it was not just looking at their positions and their work, it was really thinking much more broadly and being of service to the whole county, whether the rest of the county was aware of their good work or not. So very pleased with not just the work that has been done, but the forethought that went into this and to bringing it forward as a proposal for leadership to consider and engage. And I have to tell you, from our initial expectations, they've exceeded them all. They've really hit it out of the park. So deep appreciation to the two officers.
Okay, well, thank you so much for this portion of our employee recognition. And when we hear stories like this of, parole and probation officers, or really for that matter, any county employee that comes forward with a great idea and then can follow through and get it implemented, it's a great moment. So thank you so much for your service and good ideas and follow through. Go ahead, Commissioner.
Thank you. Just as the commissioner that represents Florence, I just want to appreciate, that outreach that you've done. I've heard back from city officials and SAISL Outreach Services how much they appreciate the work you've done. And I just want to say to everyone in parole and probation how much I appreciate the work you guys do with the heaviest caseload of high-risk offenders in the state, well beyond the averages. And with the budget situation that the board heard about last week with the PSCC budget, you guys still do incredible work and have really turned our numbers around as far as recidivism goes. You guys are all heroes. This was just a great example of just how much work you guys are doing and that outreach, and really appreciate it because it allows me, when I get that kind of, we never see the county west of the tunnel, I can go, well, here's one example. And it's really nice to have that. So thank you for the leadership you've shown and getting this relationship working with the city of Florence and the folks down there around the Roadie Fest.
Good. We have another, other commissioners want to make some remarks before you guys leave?
Hey, before you go, I just want you to know that here people are congratulating you for having an idea, making it happen, making it work. I'd like to consult with you later. I have all these ideas, but the staff here just don't let me make it happen or make it work. In all sincerity, congratulations for your work and providing the cover that Commissioner Bozovich is so appreciative of. I'm just kidding. Congratulations.
Yeah, the other commissioners might want to also say something too.
I was just going to say congratulations. I know how much in the rural communities they miss having the presence of folks like yourself and Sheriff. And so I just congratulate you for taking the extra step and the extra mile. It's much appreciated.
Commissioner Farr?
Any words I would say were superseded by what Commissioner Bozovich said. He's very closely attuned to your work, and it's amazing how much you do with so little. I know in your offices, you probably aren't as cramped and crowded as we are here in the offices in Eugene, but we all know that PNP needs more resource, and we're working on that.
Commissioner Bernie?
I would just like to share that before I took this job, I was given a tour of parole and probation, and two of the officers that gave me the tour were ex-high school students of my wife at Cottage Grove High School. I have a son in law enforcement, and I have a brother, believe it or not, who is on parole and probation in a different county. So I have a vantage point from the outside in, and in all sincerity and not kidding around, thank you so much for the work that you do.
And I said superseded incorrectly. I meant exceeded. Would be exceeded by anything that Jay said.
Well, thank you so much.
Okay, the next recognition, I'd like to invite Delbrico Kiner from Youth Services, as well as, I think, his supervisor and anyone else from Youth Services. Come on up here. We're recognizing, so during a Youth Services listening session that I had, gosh, when was this? A year ago, year and a half ago? It's been a while. I heard a story about how a youth under supervision had learned of the home address of a Youth Services officer and had vandalized the home and vehicle. And Delbrico brought to my attention during that and through subsequent communications the concern with safety of officers and the fact that for law enforcement officers, there are state laws that allow the protection of home addresses, but for juvenile officers, there are not. The state law does not allow for those privacy tools that are available to Oregon law for other law enforcement officers. So Delbrico asked, is there something that we can do to change that law? And we worked very closely and suggested this concept both to the Legislative Committee and to the Board of Commissioners, and worked with Alex Kyler, our Intergovernmental Relations Coordinator, as well as County Council to identify appropriate amendments to ORS 192 and its sections regarding public records exceptions, again, that allow for maintaining the privacy of the home addresses and information of law enforcement officers, including juvenile officers. So ultimately, House Bill 2321 was sponsored by Representative John Lively and passed both chambers, including additional protections in the form of making sure that automobile records through the Department of Motor Vehicles remain anonymous for juvenile officers. And so I want to thank, Del Brico not only brought this to my attention, sent emails to me about it, made suggestions, followed up after several months would pass. Hey, where are we at on this? Did anything happen on that? And Alex did an incredible job, as he always does, of working with our staff and shepherding through the process, identifying a sponsor and moving, what can be viewed as somewhat obscure legislation, an amendment to rather obscure legislation, but is really important for employees in the field that are doing this work that need to maintain, they put themselves at risk every day. And so we need to make sure that as a county and as a state, we're keeping their lives and their families safe. And so I want to thank Del Brico and the team at Youth Services for your support of this effort, and another great example of not just the great work that they do every day to keep our community safe and to improve the lives of young people and families who are going through the corrections and the juvenile corrections system, but to maintain the safety of the officers that are doing that work. So I want to offer, I don't know, Alex, if you have anything that you want to say, or either the other folks from Youth Services, happy to have you speak.
Commissioners, Alex Kyler, Intergovernmental Relations. The only thing I'd like to say is, 3,000 bills, over 3,000 bills were introduced. 700 made it across the finish line to get the governor's signature. So, we were really, it's no small feat to get a bill across the finish line. And it was a great idea. It came through the process the right way. And I was happy to be a part of it.
It was one of these things we didn't know about, right? And then when it was brought to our attention, we thought, well, that makes a lot of sense. Why are juvenile officers excluded from that? And so it's oftentimes we need individuals like Del Brico who are doing this work and impacted by it to bring those ideas and suggestions forward and to push and continue to prod and ask where this is at. And he did that, and it's a great demonstration of leadership, so thank you.
Commissioners, good morning. Suzanne Hughes with Youth Services. Thank you for your time this morning. I just want to thank Del Brico for his courage and commitment to not only enhancing the life of himself. It was a very unfortunate incident, but he took that unfortunate incident, focused on solutions, connected with other people in the county, and really pushed forward not only to make himself safer, but to make the whole team safer and to be able to serve our community in a better way. So I'm really proud of him. Nice job.
Good morning, Commissioners. My name is Gustavo Presidente. I'm a supervisor with Lane County Youth Services, and I feel very privileged to stand before you here, or sit before you here today with Mr. Kiner, who's not only a coworker and a friend, but also a next-door neighbor in our offices. I've gotten a chance to get to know Mr. Kiner, and I can tell you that he's one of the most dedicated employees and someone who holds his values and ethics very close to his heart and shows it with the type of work that he does with juveniles. One thing that's hard is we can never plan ahead for these unfortunate circumstances, and to see Mr. Kiner take an unfortunate circumstance and turn it into something positive is not only impressive, but also something that's not surprising, if given his character. So congratulations, Del Brico.
Well, thank you very much. The Legislative Committee examined this issue, and Mr. Mokrzyjewski and Mr. Kyler presented it, but they presented it in a fairly sort of theoretical level. Like, well, what if a juvenile probation officer were threatened in this way, and why are they treated differently than police officers? So for me, as a member of the committee, to hear the backstory, which I'm hearing now, is really great, because it's not only a matter of helping the juvenile probation officers you work with, but it's helping every juvenile probation officer in the whole state from now until the legislature changes the law, which is highly doubtful. And I just think it's great that we see and hear from a person that really kept pushing and pushing. And believe me, you saw from our public comment, one of the citizens said, I don't know if this is going to do any good or not. And so we know that might be the same attitude of county employees. Well, you try, you make a suggestion, nothing happens. So the follow-through and the what is going to happen, when is this going to happen, and taking the time and energy and not just giving up on a good idea. So I am really happy to hear the personal backstory. I mean, it's a sad backstory, right? But it's a how do we make things better story and follow through. So I think it's really great. I'm glad that Mr. Kyler was able to get this thing through the whole legislative process. Representative Lively, good friend of ours on the board, great guy, and he was the one that followed through with the legislature to get it done. And so everyone played a really important role, and it's really good news. And it's also nice to put a name with a face, because we have a phone book and we have, kind of names, but we don't always have a name with a face. So it's nice to meet you. And as soon as the commissioners finish talking, we'll give you a moment to say a few words too. Other commissioners?
Yeah, so I just want to note, one of the things Alex didn't back up to really the first step, which is before bills introduced, there's a legislative concept written. There's probably at least twice as many legislative concepts written as there are actually bills introduced. So when you think about it, there's probably 6,000 or some idea, maybe up to 10 ideas that people want to have made into law that come to a legislative session, and this one made it all the way to the governor's desk. So that's pretty impressive. It's not just, one of 3,000. It was actually probably one of 10,000 ideas that made it. And I was at the Association of Oregon Counties when this came before the Governance Committee, and it was surprising, as we were going to endorse it as the association, people were like, you mean they're not exempt, from disclosure? It was like absolute shock that you guys were exposed in this way, and people just were unaware. And I think that's why it went through so fast, was, that no one really knew that you guys weren't exempt. And the fact that Officer Kiner, brought that to people's attention, and turned a bad situation around into a focused on a solution and kept at it. Now the whole state has that protection. So truly appreciate, the effort there.
Commissioner Farr?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll be very brief. Very good presentation by Commissioner Sorensen and Commissioner Bozievich regarding the details of what you did, Officer Kiner, Mr. Kiner. But really what I want to point out is the courage it takes to step forward and take action such as you took. Whatever that action may be, you saw something that could be and needed to be fixed. And you felt not just the fortitude, but also the latitude to step forward and make the recommendation that you did. Absolutely impressive. I spent a lot of my life trying to make good organizations great, and what you did was one of the greatest examples I have personally ever seen in someone who is actually doing the work on the job on a day-to-day basis, identifying something that could very easily be changed, not easily, but that should be changed, and making certain that it happened. So congratulations. And to you, Mr. Mokrahajski, you say you're creating a culture of leadership in an environment where individuals are encouraged to create individual solutions. This is one of the greatest individual solutions that I have ever heard of in all of the organizations that I've worked with. So thank you very much.
I just want to thank you for being so persistent. I can't imagine the situation that you were in. You're not paid enough to be exposed in such a way, and it just doesn't make sense that that even occurred. And, as others have said, it was surprising to me that that hadn't been thought of before. And it's exciting to know that our employees are changing laws. Persistence changes laws. That's a wonderful thing. So thank you for doing so.
Congratulations, sir.
Now, Mr. Kiner, do you want to make a few remarks after all these things have been said about you?
Yes, thank you for the opportunity. I wasn't really expecting this forum, but I appreciate it. It was a very unfortunate time for my family. It resulted in a lot of trauma. But, you know, what really sparked it was looking around at a lot of new coworkers at the workplace who have gotten married but were afraid to change their last names because of social media and other ways of, you know, basically typing in a person's name and finding out who they are, where they living at. And so I felt like that wasn't right. You know, people celebrate their lives and big accomplishments such as getting married and moving forward and taking my situation and thought that I'd reach out and see what could we do. I have a coworker who is a spouse of a EPD officer. And, you know, I learned that information from her about what they have and kind of bounced off, well, why doesn't it apply to us? And sent the email to Mr. Mokroxy, and here we are today. So I appreciate everybody involved who thought that it was as concerning as I did to help move forward and push it through. And hopefully it stops or either slows down any other incident like this from happening to anyone else that is committed to public service. So thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Okay, Mr. Chair, and finally, last but certainly not least, I want to invite Elizabeth Maxwell, Dr. Maxwell, up here, as well as others who are here from CA. You want to come up? And Jocelyn, Lisa, everyone's welcome.
We hardly ever see these people.
It's been so long since you've seen Dr. Maxwell. She was here just a few weeks ago talking about retail cannabis. See, we have it now accurately in the vernacular. I do listen. That's good. Dr. Maxwell obviously does a great job, and so the board is familiar with her outstanding work. But here's another example, similar to the prior recognition. Dr. Maxwell approached Alex Kyler, our intergovernmental relations coordinator, in 2018 with a concern that local pharmacies were inconsistent in their approach to making it known they could prescribe naloxone to Oregon residents. Now, the board knows that naloxone is a life-saving drug that reverses the effects of opioid overdose when administered in a timely manner. And so, you know, an understanding among the pharmacies and the information shared through that is critical. So Dr. Maxwell and the prevention team had been working at the time to increase awareness in our community, and they were concerned that there was this gap in information sharing and knowledge with the local pharmacies. So her concern was brought to the legislative committee and then approved as a legislative priority by the Board of Commissioners. And again, Mr. Kyler did a fantastic job with Dr. Maxwell, working together to secure an agenda item first regarding the issue in front of Governor Brown's task force on the opioid epidemic. So Dr. Maxwell provided a great presentation on naloxone to the task force, and Lane County sought 3 distinct amendments to current Oregon law, which we felt would increase access to naloxone. Unfortunately, those were not included as recommendations by the task force, but ultimately the recommendations were inserted into Senate Bill 910 via an amendment and passed both chambers in a recent legislative session. So, you know, we've talked a lot about the significant reduction, 60% reduction, I think, in opioid use among our patients at our federally qualified health centers, you know, which has just been phenomenal work, and utilization of medications that are available for treatment of individuals going through opioid use is really critical. And so this is just another great example of a subject matter expert, dedicated and concerned in understanding the community impact that opioid use has and the challenge in an obscure area that that we had with information sharing around this issue. And so I want to thank Dr. Maxwell and the team in prevention for just the ongoing great work that you had, but bringing this idea forward is another great example of leadership, demonstrating here's a problem. We're not going to just complain about the problem. We're going to identify a solution, and then I'm going to be the one that brings it forward and figures out the way to make that happen. And even after those recommendations were not included by the task force, it didn't stop there. So again, an example of persistence and dedication and commitment to making these things happen. So thank you for the great work that you do every day and for this incredible leadership example. And I also want to say, and we held Dr. Maxwell until last because her family is here. I think, are they still here? Yeah. So her husband and her 2 children, if you can wave or stand and show the board. So oftentimes the families of our employees deal with the stress that our employees bring home from the work that they have, and it's wonderful that they can also share in the celebration and recognition of the great work that they're doing. So we welcome her family and thank them for their support of the great work that she's been doing here. I want to turn it over to Jocelyn and CA if you have anything you want to say.
Good morning, Commissioners. C.A. Baskerville, Prevention Section Supervisor at Public Health. I just want to say publicly that Elizabeth is a great representative of professionalism, of leadership. She, in addition to the work that you've seen and witnessed on occasion here, she also mentors and guides our alcohol and drug prevention team. That's a smaller team of folks that work in the prevention section. So she helps mentor and coach other staff members, other professionals who are working in alcohol and other drug prevention, the marijuana youth prevention work that you've, or retail cannabis work that you've been a part of. And then in addition, she does her own work around opioid reduction and many other things related to alcohol and drug. And she's also a leader within our larger team in prevention. So really, Elizabeth is a great pleasure to work with, and she's a great ambassador for Lane County, and I feel really privileged and honored to work with her. So thank you for this recognition for her.
The only thing I would add is Dr. Ludke, our health officer, as you know, made a comment about last week that I thought was really kind of speaks to this idea of the leadership that Elizabeth has provided for this team, and that is that he called this the work that we're doing now around prevention among youth and the awareness that's building in the community of alcohol and other drug addictions as a center of excellence within public health. And I think that really speaks to Dr. Maxwell's leadership in this issue, that she's been able to connect the legislative side of also the community awareness and working with providers and basing a lot of that, all of that in a deep understanding of the science and the evidence that we have locally. So I just also want to appreciate Dr. Maxwell's leadership in these issues and to thank her for helping put public health really at the forefront of that work.
I've got a good story about this bill because it was a really interesting thing. I mean, we saw the opportunity to work with the governor's task force on the opioid epidemic, and we really sort of kick-started, in fact, the conversation about what would be in their final legislative recommendation. I think Elizabeth's presentation was really the start of that conversation the day we went up and she presented. Unfortunately, you know, in spite of sort of continuing work with the governor's office, that concept didn't, the concepts that she'd asked for did not make it into their final recommendation. And so I sort of was scrambling in Salem after the session had already started to figure out where we were going to put this thing. And newly elected Representative Wilde, Marty Wilde, agreed to get the bill written and introduced. Well, by this time, I think we had a bill, it was a House bill up in the 3,000s, or it was a high number bill, and the House Healthcare Committee was like, we can't hear it, we don't have time. And so I was like, oh, what am I going to do now? And found another bill on the Senate side that had a relating to clause of relating to drug treatment. Worked with the people which was Multnomah County, which had introduced that bill, and managed to get an agreement to stuff our language in there. And this all happened in the literally matter of hours. Turned out when it came back over to the House side, Representative Wilde was able to come on as a co-sponsor for that bill. So it was a bill between himself, a newly minted House member, and Elizabeth Steiner Hayward, Dr. Elizabeth Steiner Hayward from Portland, who was the sponsor of Senate Bill 910. Well, you know, the bill went through both chambers and got signed by the governor, and Representative Wilde has featured it as one of the high points of his freshman year as a representative. And so, not only did we get a great piece of policy out of this, but we really built a new and strong relationship with a representative from rural Lane County. So it was a great outcome. It was a good idea, came through the process the right way, and, statewide implications.
Well, this is really great news. I thought I recognized several of your family members from Market of Choice, too, the other day. Yeah. If we could have comments from commissioners, Commissioner Farr?
Thank you. Dr. Maxwell, it's so good to see you again up here. Each time I see you, you present not always good news, but always news that can be acted upon. And, your work on drug and alcohol prevention and on tobacco has been exemplary. And I'm going to talk to your family for just a second. I don't know if you guys know how good Dr. Maxwell is at the work that she does, but more importantly, how she inspires other people to do work through the Mental Health Advisory Committee, the local Drug and Alcohol Prevention Committee, through the Mental Health Summit, and driving toward such elements as a crisis center, things that will change the lives of so many people for the future. She doesn't just sit in a vacuum doing her work, she creates work that helps people on a broad scale. Thank you very much. I'm just so pleased and proud every time I sit in the same room as you.
Okay, Commissioner Bozievich?
So obviously opioids have been dominating the news cycle for the last 24 hours. And listening to radio this morning, there was a legal expert on talking about the Johnson & Johnson Oklahoma decision. But in the course of that conversation, it was mentioned that over 400,000 people in the U.S. died since, I think it was like 2008. I can't remember what date they threw out there. This, the availability of naloxone is about preventing those deaths and turning that number around. I mean, that's just a staggering number of deaths in the U.S. It's starting to exceed, traffic accident deaths and all that as far as, a common cause of death. We really need to turn this around. We talk about the opioid crisis and all that stuff, and it was just, once again, the governance committee at AOC kind of is a catch-all committee. When it doesn't fit some other place, it ends up in governance. This bill came through governance also, and also the task force recommendations. So I got to be there as we made the recommendation to support it and kind of speak in support of it when it got to the full legislative committee of the Association of Oregon Counties. I will have to say that we're fortunate to have Alex and have him come up with his little bag of tricks and find Senate Bill 910 and make the deal with Multnomah County and all that stuff to keep things alive. Sometimes it takes that focused on solutions sort of thing also kind of spreads over there a little bit because, he managed to find a way to get it through. But understanding the whole issue, I've mentioned this before, my mom was a pharmacist, so I know there's a bazillion rules they have to try and be following and everything else. It's not just look, stick, count, and pour anymore. So it's really, pretty impressive that you were tracking all that well enough to understand the inconsistencies, between pharmacy providers and thinking of, how could we fix that? Well, statewide legislation is one of the ways to fix it, and you got that through. So I'm really impressed on dealing with an issue that is such a huge problem for the U.S. and starting to maybe turn that 400,000 number around. So I really appreciate your work, Doctor.
Okay. Commissioner Bernie, followed by Commissioner Buck.
Well, it's really interesting. I really appreciate also Alex's bag of tricks, quote unquote. But I actually don't like that stuff. What to me is, it's necessary, right? But what to me is of significance is fixing a problem, chipping away. And I've only known you in the 8 months that I've been sitting up here. But I have a question. I'd like to use this celebration of your good work to ask you a question. And that question is following Commissioner Bozievich. So I want your perspective on the significance of the Oklahoma decision with Johnson & Johnson, if you have one, because I keep hearing it's profound, but I want to get a sense of how profound it is when the rubber hits the road, or it's anticipated to be.
So I might turn this to Lisa, actually. I know that Lane County did sign on to, we are a party for future legislation, so I don't know if that includes that drug company. It might be other drug companies. So I think it sets a precedent, and I think, yes, they are the ones who caused a bulk of the problem, and they are the ones who should clean it up. And so it should be a cradle-to-grave situation. I believe there's some legislation that was just passed where the drug companies will have to put the drop boxes in the pharmacies. Yeah, right. So that's what, we need to get what's out there properly disposed of. So to answer your question, I think it just sets an awesome precedent and hopefully sets us up so that we can then be part of that at some point and get more financial help for the situation that we're dealing with now.
Makes total sense. And I'd just like to, one conclusion to that question, thank you, is the irony of that particular decision. Here's one thread of that irony, if I could share it. There was a gentleman that was a KEZI, I believe, newscaster in the 80s in Eugene named Charles Royer. And he later became mayor of Seattle, a teacher at the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard, and then he administered a $60 million grant from Johnson & Johnson Foundation called Healthy Communities. And so when you look at healthy communities and now this particular lawsuit and the larger social context you are working on, it's just so fraught with irony. And so thank you for steering the ship in the right direction.
I know you are a staunch professional in your field. It's so nice to know that we have somebody with your caliber working for Lane County. And thank you for choosing us to be with. I'm excited again, excuse me, to know that our employees are changing the laws. That's wonderful to hear. And I know that it just like Mr. Kiner, it takes a lot of persistence and trying to work through the system. It can be a huge challenge sometimes, but knowing that you're doing the right thing for the people, not only in our community, but again, around the state is a big deal. And trying to do the best work in your field, knowing you have solutions out there and making sure people hear them is awesome. So thank you, and you're appreciated.
I'll just say thank you so much for your service, and I'll echo comments about how you're choosing to stay with Lane County and work with Lane County and do the work you do in a public sphere. And public service is a very important component of all of our lives here. And just appreciate your willingness to do this. And I know this from personal experience, the sacrifice that comes with that from your family and people that you depend on to keep doing the work you do. So thank you so much. And I think we should have at least one round of applause here.
I could say, so I just want to thank Alex, first of all. Alex kind of invited me on this journey a while back, and I got to say, I didn't really know what we were doing, but I trusted him, and so, yeah, he said, oh, I'll present to this governor's task force. Oh, sure, whatever. And so we did, and yeah, it just turned out great, and I'm hopeful that next time we can get more things passed, and I just really appreciate that Alex is very open to not just this issue, but, all of the issues on the prevention team, and he's been a great partner, so I really appreciate it. And of course, these wonderful women, couldn't do any of it without them. And my family, of course, they're great for taking the morning off and coming here. And then I have to put in a bid. Saturday is International Overdose Awareness Day, and so we are actually having an event on Friday at HIV Alliance. So if none of you are equipped and carrying Narcan on your person, you can go to HIV Alliance on Friday, get food, a little swag, a really short training, and then you'll be carrying Narcan. And that's what the Surgeon General said in 2016, is that we needed to make Narcan as ubiquitous as possible in communities, and that's what I've been trying to do. And so we just keep having these events, and we get great turnout, and so I invite all of you, and I brought flyers for you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Never stop working. Exactly. Thank you. Well, I think I'm going to call up our 10 o'clock time certain. And before or while I'm doing that, I'll ask if, well, I'll just call you guys up and then we'll pause momentarily to hand out the last flyer. And let me say that we're going on to item number 8B. Shortly thereafter, we'll be going back to the consent calendar and Mr. Tintle's item. So stay tuned, Mr. Tintle. So we're now moving to item 8B. It's a discussion of the Commissioners' Retreat. With us to discuss that is Judy Williams, our Strategy and Integration Manager, Dr. Randy Harrington, who's the CEO of Strategic Arts and Sciences. We set this up for a 15-minute item. Dr. Harrington has conducted other retreats with the Board of Commissioners before, and our retreat is currently scheduled for September 11, 2 weeks from tomorrow. So we thought the board would get a little overview of what's planned. So welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you. Chair Sorensen and Commissioners, you've set it up very well. So yes, September 11th is our day for the board retreat. And so we've had the privilege of Dr. Randy Harrington helping us out for the day. And so we wanted to give you a chance to meet with him before we go in cold turkey with you on the 11th. So we have, kind of a high level of an agenda, but also wanted to give you a few moments to meet Randy, and if you want to do a quick introduction or tell them a little bit about yourself, and then we can do a quick high level and then turn it back over to you and see if we want to make sure it's successful and what you're hoping to get out of the day as well. So hoping to turn it back to you.
Nice to visit with you all. So I spend most of my time on the B concourse at Denver, going back and forth. Apparently, when you're a consultant in this space, you gain credibility and wisdom with every air mile you fly. So I'm huge on the East Coast, it's one of those things. And it's delightful to be here and to be home and to work with the good people in this community. So it's just wonderful. I do travel all the time, and I've seen this country all over the place, and I love this place, and I'm so proud to make it home. And anytime I can do anything here, it's great. I do have familiar faces up there. It's good to see you folks again. My plan, such as it is for the day, and kind of my superpower, if I have one, is the ability to let a smart board range freely in conversation and discussion and distill that into actionable guidance. So my invitation to you is kind of the pool's open. Let's do what's right for Lane County, and you just dive in, and I'll do the work of pulling that together and organizing it in a way that will allow you to make that something you can kind of tap in the wall and hang on to and climb up a little higher, right? So that's what I'm looking forward to doing. I want to echo Judy's sentiments, though, that this is all about what you folks want and need most. I will follow you, and I will help you, but it is about what you folks are looking to do. So with that, I'd be very keen to hear what you would like to get out of the day.
Do you want to make any other remarks, Judy?
If it's helpful, I can give you an outline of what I've heard to date in terms of what I've heard that you would like to cover, and that's some team building exercise, really getting to know what are the priorities in the next 1 to 2 years that you're looking to achieve. 1 to 2 years, what are the top priorities that you're hoping to achieve? And then I'll identify roles. So roles of the commissioners, roles of management team, and really kind of be clear as a group as to what those priorities are and if there's any weaving into work plan in the future. So it's high level.
Well, first of all, thank you so much, Dr. Harrington, for coming today. And it was our idea to have a little interchange with you before we do that. I'm a big admirer of your work, so I just want to say that for me, I'm hoping that this day will be a process where basically every 2 years at this point in the life cycle of a board of commissioners, that after the election and new people come on or old people go off or a combination, that at this point in the cycle, we really take a hard look at the strategic plan. And so modifying the strategic plan, if I had to say, well, what's my big outcome of today, it would be that we have a look on behalf of the 5 commissioners and the 360,000 people we represent, what do we want the strategic plan to look like? Now, we all have our own opinions of that, and as you said, I think your role is to synthesize that, but listening intently to what each of the commissioners want to do, and then setting this up for a 2-year cycle. Now, you may not be involved in every 2 years thereafter. Ms. Williams may not be involved every 2 years thereafter. I certainly won't. I can say that categorically. Mr. Malkreisky may be, but my point is I'd like to set this up institutionally for a 2-year look at that strategic plan and have the commissioners really spend a day and really think hard about what they'd like this organization to do. So
That's great wisdom.
That's what I had hoped we would do. Other commissioners, do you want to make any remarks or questions, comments?
So the success of Lane County since I've been on the board has been strongly tied to having a strategic plan and following those strategic goals and priorities and not being distracted by squirrels, as I like to call them. You know, we're not chasing squirrels. We're focused on a long-term set of priorities and working on those goals. And it's, you know, shown up time and time again in major improvements in, you know, our finances. You know, we've had goals around, you know, getting into a structurally balanced budget, which has led to our Moody's bond rating increases, to, you know, some of our goals around public safety, and we see, you know, the report we got last week about recidivism and the work we've done there. You know, our current goals around housing that we're working on. So what I'd like to see out of this is, you know, we come up with an updated strategic plan that the board buys in collectively, and we don't chase squirrels in the future. Because we've spent the last 8 months chasing a lot of squirrels. I feel like, and we need to stop chasing squirrels and get back to focused on priorities, because we don't have unlimited resources. You know, we are a very resource constrained organization. You know, both in, you know, our resource of employees. You know, we only have so many employees and they only have so much time and so many jobs to do, to our financial restraints, you know, constraints that have been placed on us when we lost the federal timber revenue. So if we're not focused on a clear strategic plan and staying within that plan, and we start chasing squirrels, we're not going to be effective at anything, because we just don't have the resources to do everything. So coming to a common agreement with the board around, you know, what are those goals and what are squirrels will be really important, I think.
Excellent.
In that, Commissioner Bozevich mentioned squirrels 5 times. I would just like, and I hope this is just fodder for you, we don't know each other from Adam. I just want to say one person's chasing squirrels is another person's storing nuts. So, thank you. I'm glad one person thought was funny. So having said that.
I just laughed a little later.
Revenge is fair
There's a
play.
slow burn there, yeah.
I want to just share, I did not understand what you said when you said what your job with us is, but I don't have any background with OD, facilitator, that stuff.
That stuff, yes.
If I read, that if you've consulted financial institutions, you both have dealt with very smart people and very creative people in terms of the law. Those are groups that I worked with a lot in my past, so that I want. And finally, I honestly, in a healthy way, not in a negative way, would choose to say that this county has changed some significant priorities over the last 8 months, and there's going to be some transition and difficulty as it relates to that. I think that some of the significance, of one idea over another idea is being ruffled a bit. So, if we're all friends and agree with each other after you're done with us, I'm all for it. And if not, well, I have trouble measuring, the effectiveness of that stuff, but I'm totally willing to learn. I have an open mind, but at least for me, that's kind of what you're dealing with.
Understood.
Okay, any other commissioners? Go ahead.
So I haven't been through this process before as one of the new commissioners, so I am not really familiar with what will happen during different stages. I'm assuming that can change depending on our conversation throughout the day. And that the morning, I think, will be dedicated, sounds like, just for the board, and then we'll have some other directors and key staff come in for the afternoon, which is a great thing, just to maybe more familiarize. One thing that I found that was really important is how do other people process decision-making? Like, I know my process, but other people do things very differently that's unique to them, and learning how each person functions in that manner, I think, is really key, especially as 2 new commissioners come on board. I'd really like to explore that. I know that a significant portion will also be about our strategic plan, and I too have an open mind about where that will take us. I think we've done some great things in the past, and there'll be some new exciting opportunities for the future. And collectively, I hope we can agree on all of those things. But I really wanted to just express the way that our communication styles vary, and being able to just know that that person's communication style is this, so that you don't assume everybody's thinking about the same thing in the same way or in the same process of analysis.
Yes, also very good wisdom. And just that little bit of knowledge can go a long way toward creating more balanced conversations, less defensiveness, and generally more productive action. So, yeah, we'll be spending some time there.
Great.
Okay, Commissioner Farr.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. What I've done in the past has little to do with what we will do in the future. That being said, when I was first chair of this board, we didn't have a strategic plan. I took a phone call one day standing on the tarmac at Reagan International Airport from this man right here, accepting the job that he has today. And at that point in time, Ms. Mokarajski and I began a discussion about strategic planning.
Yes,
the county did have a plan, a strategic plan, but at that point in time, we went through a process that developed this plan that I'm looking at right now. A very effective plan that's taken this organization from a point where we were, and I quote, bobbing along the bottom, having our finances upgraded twice by Moody's, and really becoming closer to a world-class organization. I said what I've done in the past has little to do with what I do today and what we will do in the future, but developing a strategic plan that takes good organizations and turns them into world-class organizations is something that I'm familiar with, whether it's in the private industry or in nonprofit or today at Lane County. And that's a part of what we are doing for the future, is taking a very effective, documented effective strategic plan that has taken us from this level to the level that you see today, and adjusting it, not blowing it up and throwing it out, but adjusting it to make certain it evolves for the future and focuses on the direction of this board, which 2 years from now may change. and 4 years from that, I may change again. And each time the board changes, we do not need to be wagging back and forth. We need to maintain our course and stay with a plan that has worked while adjusting it to meet today's changing dynamics in the dynamics of the community. I'm looking forward to it. I'm excited. Strategic planning is what I live for, it's what I breathe, and it's what I enjoy doing.
Outstanding.
So I think you've heard a little overview from the commissioners. We've certainly enjoyed our working with Ms. Williams and others on the strategic plan. That's not the sole purpose of this retreat we're doing next week, but it is a very important component of it, and how we alter it, change it, support it. It's all a very important part of it. So I'm really looking forward to this, and so we'll see you next 2 weeks from tomorrow, Willamette Lane, over in Springfield.
Chair.
Oh, okay, go for it.
Just real quick, I want to correct one thing that Commissioner Farr said. We did have a strategic plan.
Oh, yeah, we did.
Yeah, Bill Riles helped us develop it, and we actually had checked off almost all the goals. It wasn't what I consider a really good strategic plan. It was more of a checklist of tasks to do.
Sure.
But there was a strategic plan in place at that time.
Good. So looking forward to it. Thanks so much. I'm glad you won't have to take an airplane to Springfield to fly there. So
I know, right?
Don't go to the airport first.
Thank you.
Okay. All right.
It's a habit.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. So, Mr. Tindall, you are going to get an award of some sort for coming back here 19 times. I think this is your 21st time. 125 times you've been scheduled to come back before the Board of Commissioners on item 8A. And this is our discussion, a presentation and discussion of investment policies. Robert Tindall, Lane County Treasurer and Financial Services Manager. We set this up for a 15-minute presentation, but only a 5-minute back and forth because you've provided us so much additional information since your original scheduling. And so I'd like to just invite you to take the 15 minutes to make your presentation.
Hey, good morning. Thank you. It is a pleasure to be here, Mr. Chair, Commissioners. And we haven't had a PowerPoint yet this morning, so it's a great opportunity. You can look forward to that. So I will go over this morning. Basically, I just want to remind the board about how do we do investments? Why do we do investments? How do we invest public funds? We do follow Oregon revised statutes, our Lane manual, which contains the policies, administrative procedures manual, and then we will have some time for discussion and questions at the end. As mentioned, Oregon revised statutes, it really lays the foundations for what we need to follow. Really, ORS and ORS 294 and 295 really specify what types of investments we can invest in, the duration, what we need to look for, and also then Lane Manual 4.020, which sets the policies that the board has decided. And then APM Chapter 2, Section 20 is the administrative procedure manual that the county administrator signs off on as well. That really is the day-to-day procedures for following the policy. And we'll go over these pretty quickly. So ORS 294035, that is the main ORS that really talks about what are the types of improved investments that Lane County can invest in our public funds. U.S. Treasury and agency bonds, Oregon state and Oregon municipalities. These are local options that are out there, but they must be A-rated. We're also able to invest in California, Idaho, and Washington bonds, but those need to have a higher grade rating at AA. We're allowed to invest in certificates of deposits with financial institutions and also corporate indebtedness. But with corporate indebtedness, they must be registered with the SEC under Section 3A2 or 3A3 of the SEC. And they have to have a rating of AA or higher, or A if it's an Oregon one. The ORS allows 35% of our portfolio to be invested in corporate bonds, but not more than 5% in any single issuer. And then, of course, the local government investment pool, which is, it's limited by ORS 294810, and we'll talk a little bit about that as well. So those are the major investments that ORS allows us to invest in. ORS 294810, as I talked about, the Oregon Local Government Investment Pool, currently that limit's at $49,500,000, and that's like a checking account for state and local governments that we can put money in and get money out, same-day liquidity. So it really offers the liquidity that we need. And I just included here, you can see a table of the interest rates, what they have been from January of 2017, how they've continued to increase through December 24th, 2018 up to 2.75, but just recently, because the feds did decrease the rate, the Fed rate, that it decreased to 2.60 on August 9th. However, in terms of public investing, that is still a very good rate of return, and that is why we do choose to invest in the Oregon Local Government Investment Pool, because of the safety, liquidity, and the marketability of this, that is always right there for us. ORS 294135 also talks about the duration. There's maturity dates that you need to follow. The ORS says that you cannot invest make an investment longer than 18 months. It can't be longer than that. However, unless the board adopts, your governing body adopts a policy in writing that says that, and that's kind of we are required to have a written policy, which we do, which is our APM, which we'll talk about in a minute. Our policy must be submitted to the Oregon Short-Term Fund, the board, for review if there are material changes. And finally, the OSTFB does assist us with our policies for any funds that we have invested outside of the LGIP. They're a resource as well. ORS 295002 limits public funds to $250,000 per financial institution. That's the ones that are FDIC insured, or for the credit unions insured as well. Both limits are at $250,000. However, unless that public funds are invested in a financial institution, that's part of the Oregon Public Funds Collateralization Program. And that is a program that the financial institutions voluntarily sign up with the state of Oregon, and they have to meet all these pre-qualifications and present their financials, and to make sure that they can well manage the investments of public funds. And Oregon maintains that list of qualified financial institutions. So what we do is we take ORS, and we do have Lane Manual, which is the policy that's set forth by the Board of County Commissioners. So there are 7 items in the investment policy currently that the Board of County Commissioners has directed, and this is a summary of them. First of all, of course, we want to follow state and federal statutes and regulations. That's always a good thing. Our board has decided the current policy is the maximum of 3 years maturity. As I mentioned, ORS limits it to 18 months. However, the board has decided that we will allow 3-year maturity. We are allowed to go beyond that if the board has specifically granted an authorization for a specific investment for a specific purpose. So if we wanted to invest longer than 3 months, 3 years, we would come to the board. I would come to the board and say, hey, we would like to do an investment longer than 3 years, then you would approve that. Currently, we don't have any board-approved investments longer than 3 years. But that is our policy, the policy according to Lane Manual. Third, the Director of Operations or the delegated county treasurer authorizes investments, signs off on them. Fourth, county officials shall deposit funds in checking accounts. And it's approved checking accounts that are listed with the county treasurer. Fifth, investments should ensure a competitive rate and consider safety, liquidity, and yields. And these are the main capstones of all public portfolios, whether from the state or county or local governments. We always want to make sure we're considering first and foremost the safety of all of our investments of public funds, the liquidity that if we need to get to them, we can sell them and get to the funds that we need. And then we also consider the yield as well. Sixth, the county administrator is delegated authority to develop and maintain administrative procedures. So that's really the day-to-day, how do we go about investing, and kind of more of the specific guidelines that we must follow in this. And seventh, we adopt the policy annually by the BCC, and that is actually what we did when we brought up this conversation last time. First, we presented to the Finance and Audit Committee, and then we brought forward the recommendation to reapprove our policy. So this is the current policy, general policy that the board has in Lane Manual 4.020. Now we'll go over the Administrative Procedure Manual and a little more specifically what we follow in addition. So this is found in APM Chapter 2, Section 20, Investment Procedures. And again, the delegation of the authority is to the Director of Operations or the designee, which is myself as the County Treasurer. It requires that we have an investment advisory committee, and that's made up of departmental representative, myself, and staff on there. We have to, again, make sure, and there's details on all these in the APM, which is included in the board agenda memo that you have with you. General objectives, again, safety, liquidity, and yield. Selection of brokers and dealers, it talks about a process that we have to go through of who we are authorized to buy and sell investments through, mostly. Custody and safekeeping. A safekeeper, that's kind of a new word too. It's like, what is safekeeping? This is actually a great concept that we are required to have a safekeeper in that if we make an investment, we submit our investment to our safekeeper, which U.S. Bank is our safekeeper, saying this is what we want to buy. And then first, we have already worked with our broker-dealer and said, hey, yes, let's buy this investment. So we submit our information to the safekeeper. The broker submits it to the safekeeper. U.S. Bank, our funds will not be transferred unless both of those match. That's why they call it safekeeper. So anyway, and finally, reporting. We must report annually back to the Finance and Audit Committee, which we do. And we meet quarterly with the Investment Advisory Committee. Continuing on, specifically, and most of these follows the ORS. Our basic policy mostly follows the ORS with the exception of the duration of time. Instead of 18 months, it's 3 years, as I mentioned. Again, we can invest in financial institutions that have a head office or branch in Oregon and that participate in the Public Funds Collateralization Program. It allows us to invest in the Oregon Local Investment Pool, Oregon Treasuries and agencies of the federal government. Again, State of Oregon political subdivisions with the A rating, or California, Washington, and Idaho with AA ratings. And finally, corporate indebtedness with AA ratings and registered with the SEC. We do have investment parameters. As mentioned, the maximum allowable according to ORS with the LGIP is $49,500,000. And again, those rates are typically favorable and that money is liquid. We typically tend to invest in that first. U.S. Treasuries and agencies, our current policy, which is a little different from ORS, also allows 33% into each of those entities, whether it's U.S. Treasuries or the different federal agencies. And that's where that is specific to us. Some other counties and cities, it's 100% U.S. Treasuries. Their portfolio may not only buy U.S. Treasuries, but the max allowed is up to 100%. And so we do have a little difference there. Corporate, 35% in total max or 5% each issuer. And again, that's consistent with ORS. And we can purchase CDs up to 10% of the deposits of the institution. We also look at maturity. As mentioned, the board has allowed 3 years of our maturity, so we also like to spread that out. It's what they call a ladder. You don't want all your investments maturing on the same day. You want to spread that out based on your cash flow needs. So we set parameters with 20% of our portfolio should be within 6 months, 30% within a year, half of it within 2 years, and finally the full portfolio needs to mature under 3 years. When we looked at our last report, calendar year 2018, we do this on a calendar year basis. Of course, we make sure we follow. It's a self-audit here, which we present to the Investment Advisory Committee along with the Finance and Audit Committee, and make sure we're following all the guidelines that we have set forth according to RS, the Lane Manual policies, and the procedures that we have, and we did meet those. Let's talk a little bit about, well, what is our portfolio currently? How much are we talking about? So as of July 31st, I'm going to present a few slides that talk about what our current portfolio actually invests in. As mentioned, the Oregon Local Investment Pool, and these numbers are as of July 31st. You got to keep in mind this is a changing portfolio. We have maturities of bonds that happen on a regular basis. And so, but we do prepare reports monthly on this as well. Anyway, 38 million or 13% of our portfolio is in the LGIP. Again, and those have the good rates, allows us to transfer money in and out as needed very easily. U.S. Treasury, we currently have 8% into U.S. Treasuries. And this, what is out there, some say 10 to 20% of your portfolio really for public investing in public funds should be into U.S. Treasuries. But again, our policy sets up to 33% currently. Federal agency coupon securities, 49%, which at 141 million. Financial institutions at 13% or 36 million. And we'll get into the details of all of these. And this number, actually, I'll give you a heads up, really represents the most of it. All but 2 million is invested in our local financial institutions in certificates of deposits. Municipal bonds, we have 8% of our portfolio or 23 million, and corporate bonds 9% at 27 million. So just a little detail. So here's of our U.S. Treasuries and securities. We have the U.S. Treasury, 23 million, as mentioned, 8%. And this details out our other federal agency investments that we have. And again, usually for public funds investing, the concept is to make sure that your investments are tied in some way to the federal government, because those are actually considered the most secure, the most safe, the most, if our federal government has financial issues, which they do, but if they're not paying their bonds, right, then there are other issues there as well. But that is the general concept there. Financial institutions, again, so 14%. And with this is really where we get to investing in the social fabric of our community. It is through our certificate of deposits that we have at our local credit unions and financial institutions. So you'll see with Northwest Community Credit Union, we have about 10 million in CDs, Oregon Community Credit Union, 10 million, Summit Bank, 4 million, and that actually decreased recently because they did have some maturity of their CDs and the rates offered weren't as competitive, and we actually mixed them up with some of the other financial institutions locally. Umpqua Bank, 10 million. Part of this on a couple of these is part of a money market account also, but in general, it's all invested here locally with our community. Next, we get to our municipal bonds. And again, when you're investing in other municipalities, local governments, whether it's state, whether it's city, school districts, whatever, that is the investment in the social fabric of the community as mentioned. And when we talk about ESG, environmental social governance investing, for some public funds, as we could talk about also, this is where they see their social investments as well, as really getting to the heart of the community and supporting these on there. So as you go through these, you can see that we do try to invest in other communities locally. As you'll see, the City of Eugene Parks and Rec, we were able to pick up $1 million. They issued $5 million most recently, a few months ago, from one of their bond measures, and they were only issuing $5 million, and so we were lucky to get $1 million of it, and so, because we obviously do want to support them. City of Portland Sewer System, Deschutes County Hospital Authority, Marion and Polk County School District. You will see here up in the Portland area, the affordable housing bond that they issued, we were able to pick up $2 million of that as well. School pension bond refunding, Portomoro, Portland Community College, State of Oregon University System. Obviously, the school districts seem to pass a lot of bond measures, right? So that's why there's a lot of them out there. And we're supporting local communities by picking up some of these bonds when we can. Other municipal bonds outside Oregon, as mentioned, ORS and our APM allows us to invest in California, Washington, and Idaho, as well as Oregon. So here there's school districts in California, along with general purpose and wastewater bonds as well. Again, each of these municipal bonds help the community, help encourage investments, similar to if Lane County issues bonds, right? We want others to invest in our bonds as well. And so total of the municipal bonds, Oregon and California equal 8% of our portfolio. When you add that with the other investments that we have in the financial institutions, which are also local, that's over 20% there is invested. When we look at corporate bonds, again, the ORS in our policy allows up to 35% of our portfolio to be invested in corporate bonds, and we currently have 9.5% invested, and no more than 5% can be invested in any one financial institution. And so these are the lists of some institutions that we currently have with our corporate bonds. Finally, in summary, just as a reminder, there are 3 objectives that we must follow as we're investing public funds. We have to consider safety first and foremost, although all are equally important. The preservation of our investments, we are not investing public funds to take a loss, to take a risk. That's why we're not investing in high risk or low grade investments, because we don't want to risk the loss of taxpayer funds and taxpayer money. Liquidity, we need to make sure we're investing in funds that are liquid enough where if we need to sell a bond to meet the timing and cash needs of the county, then we need to be able to do that. We haven't done that, but it's also because we also, it's that ladder I'm talking about, that maturity ladder. We make sure we invest in funds in the timing of when we need them. Sometimes bonds are offered up, but they're at a time when we don't need to get that when they mature. So we have to make sure we're investing our funds when we need the funds coming back in at the maturity. And again, active on the secondary or resale markets in case that need is there. And these are general objectives that are followed by the state of Oregon and required in the ORS and our APM. So it's not just Lane County that seeks these out, it's general guidance. And the yield, we attain a market rate of return throughout economic cycles. We know interest rates go up, interest rates go down, but as we continually invest in that maturity, that helps us diversify and to protect our portfolio as well. So in conclusion here, the ORS, again, I highlighted just some of them. The ORS was included in the packet as well, detailed for your convenience there. ORS authorizes and restricts certain investments of funds, which we talked about. The BCC sets the policy, and that's contained in Lane Manual 4.020. Finally, the county administrator develops and maintains the procedures. Those are more the specifics of day-to-day, how to carry out the policies. And finally, the county treasurer manages the portfolio according to the APM procedures and the policies set forth by the Board of County Commissioners. Now, we do know that even without very specific policies, we know that overall we're very intentional and mindful in some of the investments that we invest in, and we are looking for those opportunities to invest in local and also in municipal government bonds, and so that's usually what we are mindful of. So with that, I will open up the discussion for questions and comments from
Okay,
commissioners.
well, thank you very much. I know you've made this presentation to the Finance and Audit Committee, and this is really excellent for the public to have, and with our contract with Lane Council of Governments Television, this is great information that the public can have access to. Are there commissioners that have comments or questions? Okay, I see Commissioner Burney.
So when are we going to divest of Johnson & Johnson?
We can look to see when that maturity, definitely with under the 3 years, we can look specifically with that.
The stock rallied today.
Yeah.
Thank you, Commissioner. So I want that point to guide some of my questions. First, I want to call out, thank you, because Mr. Tindall spent a voluminous amount of time with me, bringing me up to speed on some of this. Do you have the ability, so just a series of questions, do you have the ability to press a button and know that moment the total amount of our investment, money invested?
It is more than a press of a button, but yes, we do have the ability to know the book value of our investment.
Which is great.
Portfolio. And we do that monthly, and we also post that monthly on the intranet, which all the commissioners have access to as well.
Can we purchase our own bond issuances?
That's actually a good question. We haven't. I don't know that we have that ability, but maybe we do and have to follow up on that one.
Well, when you speak about investing locally.
Right. We're more local. What's more local than ourselves?
Thank you. Just a few, rattle them off. You mentioned the social, investing in the social fabric of the community, and, you know, my hand is always tilted. I'm trying to do local, 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 local. Do we solicit local financial institutions to apply to be qualified to receive our deposits?
Our APM does contain a competitive clause, so like when we went out for CDs, we sent a request to financial institutions to find out what their rates are, and we do go with competitive bids on our CDs from the local financial institution.
So why is, like, for example, Selco not on that list?
And it could be based on the rates. It could be also, we also need to make sure that they're on the Oregon collateralized public list, which
And that's what I meant. Do we invite locals to get on that list so we can invest with them?
that is their, the information is out there and available to them from the state of Oregon. It is a process that the financial institution needs to go through to work with through the state of Oregon to get approved. And there is the listing again of the financial institutions that are approved.
Thanks a lot, Robert. So now I want to get to Commissioner Farr's point. I am no one to disagree with any of the policies or processes that are required of us. But I did note you say that the board can establish priorities and policies. So I have some questions about that. Do we, whether locally, with local institutions, do we assess whether their loans are entirely local? For example, you mentioned U.S. Bank or banks that would be based somewhere in Oregon. Do we evaluate the degree to which the money the institution invests back in Lane County specifically?
That is not part of the criteria, like when we did the CDs with our local credit unions. Although we do know that there is some investment that they do. We have not in the past looked at more the detail beyond that.
So I'm not saying the rest of the commissioners would agree, but I would always look at how we can increase investment in local businesses and local home loans and local communities. So I would encourage that as something we look at.
Well, and that is why we do invest our CDs within the local credit unions and financial institutions, because.
Right, but do we look at where they invest?
Yeah.
That was my, and then on a more global level, and I think Johnson & Johnson is a good example of that. So here's a company that just received a $500 million fine in one state, and yet, as Commissioner Farr aptly pointed out, it's a good investment. So I would suggest we sort of tighten our policy of what is a good investment, and this is just something for the board to think about. But here's my question to you, Mr. Tindall. Do we evaluate the environmental impact of those entities that do receive Lane County investments in terms of what they do with the money?
Okay, first, to respond to Selco Credit Union, your question on that, it is correct, they are not on the, or currently listed on the Oregon collateralized list.
Right.
Secondly, Johnson & Johnson does mature in March of '21. And actually, when we purchased that, we followed, it was according to our current APM and current ORS, where we did look at bond ratings, or looked at their ratings and the maturity schedule as well.
Could you put that slide up?
Yeah.
As we're, because I just a couple more questions and I'm
One
done.
other thing again, and our investments are not in stocks or mutual funds, these are corporate bonds as well. So our rate of return that we get from any corporate investment issuer, it's based on it's a corporate bond, it's not a stock. So, our interest rates don't go up and down as they.
So as we look at that, and I'll just encapsulate my remarks rather than dragging them out. I think we ought to also look at the local job impacts, even with the corporate investments that we make. We ought to look at the wages that they pay workers as part of our criteria to ensure that they actually are consistent with our philosophy of paying a living wage. Obviously, I think that we ought to evaluate the degree to which local dollars come back to our local community, and that's really all. So I'm not critical at all, you know that, but I'm just saying I think we could look at other kinds of criteria by which we determine whether something is a good investment or not. Instead of, I say this with unions, by the way, a lot of times, don't limit yourself to just wages, hours, and conditions. Let's look at the other impacts of what collective bargaining can be about, and I'm just making the same point here. And thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, Commissioner Bozovich, then Commissioner Buck.
Thank you. You already somewhat answered part of my question, which was those banks that we were showing that were over 250,000 in deposits, they all are on the state collateralized list, approved list. And I assume that the reason Selco and like Oregon Pacific Bank maybe don't show up on that list is in order to be on that list, you have to hold a higher level of collateral so that you're, quote, a safe enough investment for public funds. Is that an accurate description?
That is, I would say that is a simplified, accurate description.
Yeah.
That would be correct.
There's
State of Oregon has a full criteria.
Yeah, but
that does
basically, not every bank chooses to do that because if they're holding that collateral, they're not reinvesting it at a higher, they're not getting the return on that collateral. And that's why not every bank decides to be on that list. So it might be a decision by Selco that we don't want to hold enough collateral aside to get approved by the state for public fund investments over 250,000 because, our board's made a decision that we're better off not being on that list and having more freedom to invest much more of our deposits rather than hold them back as collateral, and re-loan out those deposits. So it's a business decision by banks. How much we're able to influence banks and credit unions on whether they choose to have that higher level collateral requirement and whether there's enough public fund investing going on in the state that it's advantageous for them to be there, I think I don't know if that's in our wheelhouse. So I appreciate seeing that list because, one of the first things that came to my mind is, here's a great local bank on the coast, Oregon Pacific Bank, another way to be west of the tunnel, but they may not be on that list. So, it's just, we don't really control that. And there is a reason why some banks don't get on that list. It's a business decision. Looking at the muni bond list, the question I had there was, municipal bonds generally mature a lot longer than 3 years. And we're purchasing, City of Eugene bonds and all that stuff. Are we counting on being able to resell them in the market prior to their full maturation, or?
Sometimes when there's, say, 20-year bonds, they still issue them in periods of time. And so we do only purchase investments that do mature under 3 years.
Okay.
So even all of these do mature under 3 years, even if they've issued bonds for a longer period of time.
Okay, great. I just want to make sure I was clear on that. And I did note the Johnson & Johnson on the list, but you did explain that when you purchase that corporate bond, that rate is set. They don't float with the news of lawsuit settlements or anything like that. And I know it's difficult for us to be analyzing everything from wages paid to, what that company's carbon footprint is. That's going to be a difficult thing to do amongst all in addition to getting, the safety, yield and maturation dates that you need to fit your portfolio. So it appears to me that you're doing, incredible work with all this, and you look at the majority of our investments really with the federal government, between the direct investment of Treasury bonds and then all the U.S. agencies we're invested in, that seemed to be pretty close to over half of our investments. That's pretty safe and sound finances, I'd say. So I don't see a need to really change our policy at this point.
Okay, other commissioners? I believe Commissioner Buck was in the queue, and then Commissioner Farr, myself, and we'll have a second round as well.
Excuse me. So back in the day, a decade or almost 2 decades now, when I used to design and administer corporate retirement plans, there was a movement on the investor side of companies really wanting to make sure that when they chose the investments they were putting into their pensions for their employees, that they were investing in socially responsible funds. And it's a little bit different in this case. I understand that, they're really looking into not municipal bonds really, but mutual funds and stocks. And sometimes they're specific stocks, but sometimes they were, grouped. And that was, as I transitioned out of that particular profession, but that became more and more popular as they found socially responsible funds to be making the same or more than competitor funds. And so do we have a policy to try to invest in socially responsible funds in some of these categories where that opportunity exists and they make the equivalent or more than, the standard traditional investments?
Lane Manual 4.020 lists the current policies that the board has set. And so those are the policies that we do follow and that our APM does follow. As you pointed out, we do not invest in mutual funds. We're not allowed to per the ORS, stocks, municipal funds. ORS does allow if we held funds for like deferred comp, which is a lot of those programs, that we hold in a trust that we're liable ourselves for, then there is some ability there. But when we're talking about investing public funds, which is way different than investing your own personal funds, right? Because you with those, you're also allowed to take the risk that you want to take. So for investing public funds, we only are allowed to follow what is according to the ORS. This, if you call it ESG investing, environmental social governance, or it could be sustainable investing, however you want to phrase it, it does capture a lot of these concepts. This is a newer concept for the public financial, public entities. And so there aren't many that do have specific policies that may address ESG investing in their governance. I did find, and most of our comparables only follow ORS. In fact, they don't even go any beyond ORS, which we slightly alter there. There are a few examples. I can give you a couple examples where they have changed the policy. So City of Portland, this is what they call positive or best-in-class screening. So when you set a policy, one way you could do it is by listing a positive list of corporate indebtedness that you are allowed to invest in. And that is what the City of Portland did. Their council has approved a list of corporate bonds, and there's 12 bonds that they're able to invest in. And we know the City of Portland is pretty progressive in some areas. And actually, surprisingly, Johnson & Johnson is one of them on the list, on their current approved list. Now, they could change that at any point as well. But anyway, that's positive or best-in-class screening, where the board could say there are corporate indebtedness that the county is allowed to invest in, and here are the approved corporations that you are allowed to invest in. And that could look at all the specifics that you want to look at, because again, yes, as Mr. Brozovic wisely pointed out, we do not have a staff to full and timing as we manage these investments ourselves to dedicate 100% to investment portfolio. I do want to take a moment, sorry, as I divert. And Andrew B. Miller, our supervisor, is here. We do have a chain of authority and custody where we, not all of this is handled by me. I do sign off on all the investments as a county treasurer. We have someone else looking and making investment decisions and running them by me. And then we have a third person that does all the accounting work and the bookkeeping, Crystal Nevins, our great accounting analyst as well. So we do have that segregation of duties to protect public funds as well. Couldn't go away without saying that. Okay, so the positive screening is what City of Portland has chose to do, where they list, these are the corporate bonds you're allowed to buy. On the other side of that, there's what they call negative or exclusionary screening. And what that is, for example, Multnomah County says their policy states you shall not directly invest cash assets in the corporate debt securities issued by any fossil fuel companies. listed on a fossil fuel index. So Multnomah County has chosen the exclusionary where it says, don't invest in any fossil fuels. And as you notice, even though we don't have that policy, we don't invest in any fossil fuels either. Also, when you look at social investment, we don't invest in Walmart. Although, our advisors will tell us that's a strong, sound investment as well. But other people does have some concerns about that. So we do make some mindful and thoughtful considerations in our investments that we do make. More locally, City of Eugene, obviously they've wrestled with this situation as well. They have a similar negative exclusionary screening clause in their policy, and they're similar to Multnomah where they do not allow direct investment into any fossil fuel company, top 200 fossil fuel company. Really, the top 200 is kind of, really, you could just say the top 10 fossil fuel companies, and that would capture all of them anyway, because any of the ones that are lower, they will never be able to meet the minimum bond ratings that we'd have, and they're usually not issuing corporate bonds. And some of these are issuing stock anyway, and we don't purchase stock. So there are some limits that you could put in policy, and in fact, for if the board chose to change the current policy, which is listed up on the screen, for administration of it, it would be better if you just simply attached an exclusionary policy, don't invest in these things, or a positive clause, best-in-class screening where it says only invest in these corporate bonds. Then it's very clear, and we're not making those subjective decisions, right? That is there. That is one thing that our investment advisors and all public funds, this is a topic for county treasurers all across the country, right? And we get together and we know that boards come and go, and what one board may decide, another board may not decide, right? And these investments are also subjective. What one commissioner may support, another commissioner may be against, and so some of these are conflicting. We also know there's common ground that everyone can agree on. So, but what we try to do also is follow whatever policy is set forth, and then also maintain the safety, security, and liquidity of all investments so that we make sure we protect the investment of public funds at every cost. Thank you for indulging me in a long answer.
Okay, Commissioner Farr, myself, and then Commissioner Burney.
This is really important stuff we're talking about. Boil it down to the word stuff. But I'm not going to spend a lot of time because I'm blessed to spend quite a bit of time listening to you, and I enjoy it. When I was in the House of Representatives, I sat on the House Committee on Revenue. And we met every day for 4 or 5 hours every single day. And I'd come back to my office thrilled and excited and bouncing off the walls. And my staff would have X's for eyes. They say, how can you listen to that stuff? So, well, because really, this is really what makes everything tick. This is really what makes everything that we want to do happen, is the sound fiscal financial management that you and your department allows us to stand upon. Without that, we have no solid ground at all. So a couple of things that you said really toward the end there that really were gems. Boards come and go. We know that. And investments are both subjective and can be conflicting. But the work that you do has to arch through all of that. And it really has to be a steady path that you guide us on, that you and staff guide us on, to make sure that we don't have the ups and downs in our investments. We don't buy stocks for that reason. There may be other reasons we don't buy stocks. But we get to see the reports on a regular basis. Commissioner Buck is now on the Finance and Audit Committee, and we get to see him on a regular basis, and it gives me a great deal of confidence in asking for some of the things that we ask Mr. Mokrahysky to help us to fund, because you're there doing it. So the last thing I'd like to say is this is all a part of our strategic plan. The work that you do is a part of the strategic plan that we've developed over the last number of years that has gotten us to this point in time. In fact, I'll point out we have 4 strategic priorities. The 4th one, and I'll go through a couple of sentences, but the last sentence is really an important part of this priority. That is, we provide it's our people and partnerships. We provide a safe, healthy, and inclusive work environment that attracts and retains a diverse, highly skilled workforce with a deeply embedded commitment to delivering value and service to the residents of Lane County. Now here's the gem. Through fiscal resilience and partnerships, and that's what you do. And thank you for doing that. Thank you for maintaining the course and making certain that whatever we choose to do as policy and whatever we would like to do as an organization, you provide us a solid backing to do it, not just for today, but on a sustained and sustainable basis. Thank you, Mr. Tyndall, and thank you.
Well, first of all, I just want to thank you for this presentation. I know we're going well beyond our 5-minute estimate. Thank you for offering that suggestion, and I accepted it, and here I am taking up more than the total 5 minutes. I think that what's on my mind really can be boiled down to two things. One is I'd really like to see if it's possible for you specifically to invite all the credit unions in Lane County that are both part of the authorized pool, such as Oregon Community Credit Union, but all the others that aren't, and invite them to a briefing where you would explain to them why we don't invest in the ones we don't invest in and why we do invest in the ones we do, namely that they're on the list and what it takes to get on that list so that we can move to more local investment of those funds, because as I understand, we do have significant investments with Northwest Credit Union and Oregon Community Credit Union, but not, say, one of the larger credit unions like Selco. So I'm just really interested in whether that's something you could do, whether you wouldn't take any action on our part for you to do that, but that would be a way for us to extend the fact that we are, otherwise going to be putting these funds into corporate bonds or into the Canadian banks or other places, and while that may have some safety associated with it, I think that if our local credit unions knew why we weren't putting funds into theirs, that they may well change their behavior and be a partner with us. What do you think of this?
As you know, ultimately, it is a decision for each financial institution whether they become part of the program or not. We can talk about the benefits. We could send out informational material to them to make sure that they're aware of the Oregon collateralization program. I would assume they are aware, but we can do some outreach to them to ensure that they are aware. And in addition, as part of our normal practice, when we are going to be issuing some new CDs, we can send blanket emails out to all of them as well. One thing that we don't have a lot of, as you'll see, we don't have a lot of the $250,000 each investment in each of those local credit unions or financial institutions. But part of that is because it's also administratively, it is a lot of work and extra auditing and accounting for that, even though it adds up meaningfully, but it's easier and better for us to make some of these larger investments in some of these local financial institutions to still reap the benefit of it.
My second thing is when in 2016, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau fined Wells Fargo $185,000, $1 million, as a result of the creation of millions of fraudulent savings and checking accounts by Wells Fargo. This kind of blends into the Johnson & Johnson thing, that we are not investing Lane County funds in the stock of Johnson & Johnson or Wells Fargo, and that's clear. But we are, as far as we can tell from what was presented today, we are purchasing corporate bonds of, in the case of Wells Fargo, a company that's facing an estimated $2.7 billion in threat by stockholders, by the public, by their customers, and for the fraud that at least they've been fined for. So you mentioned that this is a hot topic within the county treasurer world of people concerned about the issues raised by Commissioner Buck and Commissioner Berney. I am very interested in, maybe I'll leave it this way, that could you write an email to the Board of Commissioners that basically talks about what you'd recommend in terms of, hey, we don't want to invest in tobacco or I should say invest, we don't want to buy corporate bonds in tobacco companies when we've got a bunch of people in our Health and Human Services that are trying to, do something about tobacco addiction. Similarly, we don't want to help corporations that have been successfully fined for fraudulent activity. We don't want to be suing for collection of illegal opioid products where we're suing and then learn that we're buying corporate bonds in one of the companies that we're suing. So I would like to boil this down to, could you send us an email on some recommendations that you would have? And that way, we could at least read your email rather than try to hassle that out here. I think that you've got some good, you're hearing some perspectives of the commissioners on what they're concerned about. We also obviously want to comply with all Oregon law with regard to the diversity of our financial portfolio. So I just leave you with that. Is that something you'd be willing to do?
Absolutely. Follow any direction according to the board direction.
Yeah.
It may also be a good conversation and topic that we can get into more of a work session with the Finance and Audit Committee to bring back, because there are a lot of choices that the commissioners can decide. They can decide where we don't invest in corporate bonds at all. We can set our policy at 0, or as I mentioned, you can set the ones that you do want to invest in, assuming they meet all the other, criteria.
And all I'm saying is, to kick that off, could you send the email to the commissioners, and then obviously the Finance and Audit Committee will be able to use that, as well as the board will be able to use that to follow that discussion.
Yep.
Okay. All right. Commissioner Burney wanted to be recognized.
I promise this board I will not talk on other agenda items because I know we're going over, and yet, honestly, this is almost $300 million we're talking about that we have stewardship over. So in my mind, that justifies this. I would like to say that first off, I'm very aware that Chair Sorensen, past Chair Bozovich, and past Chair Farr are as well as County Administrator Mokraheisky and you yourself, sir, did the heavy lifting and are the reason why we are in the sound financial position that we're in right now. So do not take anything, any inputs of mine as critical of that. In fact, they're hugely appreciative because we can't talk about getting better if we weren't where we already are, which is much better than where we were. Having said that, I really appreciate Commissioner Buck's point about socially responsible investments. I really appreciate your stating how, in fact, we can move in that direction in a way that's consistent with law and consistent with what we can do. I really appreciate Commissioner Bozovich's gentle criticism of some of the points I made, and I mean that. I think that the word assume has been stated once by you and once by Commissioner Bozovich, and it both related to the behavior of credit unions or banks in the local community and why they are or are not or have not chosen to get on that list. And I just want to say that I think that that's speculative. We don't know what their business decisions are. And so I really want to underscore that the county could play some leadership and provide an education about how, if they want, for their own internal business decisions, they could get on that list, and how this county would like to invest more dollars locally. So I just wanted to reiterate that, and I'm really going to be curious about what you learn about purchasing our own bond issuances in terms of that virtual circle of keeping money local. And thank you for the time. I think this is a significant discussion. It's a lot of money.
Okay, any more on a second round?
Yeah.
Commissioner Bozovich.
I'll try and be fairly quick. My biggest thing about this investments that we're making, these investments are our reserves funds. This is the money that's being set aside to close Short Mountain. This is our road fund reserve. This is our general fund reserve. These are monies that that were set aside from tax dollars and fees from the public that are in our trust. So, my biggest concern with this is we do have a trust relationship on this money. It's other people's money, really. And that issue about safety and liquidity and yield, that's most important to me. And maintaining, adherence to state law. That's one of the reasons why there's so much state law around this, is the state recognizes that each one of the counties has this public trust. I am real concerned about the idea of investing in ourselves. That circular investment, that got some corporations and some banks and some serious issues, in the past, So I just, we need to be a little bit careful about that. I'm not sure whether it's even legal under state law, but I'm a little concerned about that, unless there was some very strict limits put around it, similar to the no more than a certain percentage of our portfolio can be done in that way, and there's a limit to, that maybe a 5%, of that portion could be in any single bond issuance or something, but it's just a little scary to me to start circularly investing, because the whole point of the state law around this money is to try and make sure it's safe and liquid, and I'm not so sure investing in ourselves quite meets the idea of that public trust and keeping that money safe and liquid.
Okay, Commissioner Farr?
Ever so briefly, Mr. Tyndall, you sat here very patiently and listened to the things that we've had to say, and I just want to point out that, investing locally, obviously, is our first choice. You've already demonstrated that. You showed the slide with all the local investments that we participate in. And while we can enhance that, and while we can look at the way they invest their money, I think you've already demonstrated that that is a policy that we have undertaken for quite some time now, as far as I know, that investing locally is how we get ahead. But Commissioner Bernie's asked a number of times about getting on the list and about Selco, and I agree that finding out how we can more effectively invest locally, including a broader range of institutions that we could potentially invest with, I'm interested in that. As a former Selco board member, this is what I can say about how I know Selco invests its money. I don't know. So that is, so clearly, us getting information on that is something that can help you and your staff to work into the future and to respond to what we all have stated. Let's invest locally as much as we possibly can. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much for this 5-minute discussion that we had after your very timed and excellent presentation. So you can follow up as necessary with the email and with the meeting of the Finance and Audit Committee. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay, we are going to eventually get back to our main agenda, but in the meantime, let's call up the consent calendar. We have a number of items on our consent calendar on page 1 and page 2 of our printed agenda. Are there any commissioners who want to take any off the consent calendar to have a separate vote? Commissioner
I don't
Carney.
think it's worthy of taking it off, but I noticed a couple of typos on the letter to Representative DeFazio that I can just share with you what I found after we approve this.
Okay, well, why don't you send those to Ms. Jones and Mr. Kyler, because they'll probably be the ones processing that letter.
Will do. Just wanted to call it out.
Yep.
You saw that too? Yeah.
Any other things that need to be brought to my attention on the consent calendar? Commissioner Farr.
I'm highly opinionated about alternative courts, but let's not pull it off the agenda to talk about it.
Yeah, I thought of that too, but
Yep.
we'll let it stay.
Very good. Okay, so do you need to be recognized? No. Okay, at this time, I'll entertain a motion to approve the consent calendar as presented with the change in the letter to Representative DeFazio, and other than that, we'll get the motion.
So moved?
Okay, It's been moved by Commissioner Buck, second by Commissioner Bernie to approve the consent calendar as presented, except for the typographical errors in the letter to Congressman Fazio. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. Motion carries 5-0, and all the orders are adopted. This time I will call up Ms. Holmes, Dr. Creer, and anyone else involved in item 9A. This is the report back regarding recommendations for the recruitment process for the new county performance auditor. Both Ms. Holmes, our Director of Human Resources, and Dr. Casey Creer, the Lane County Performance Auditor, are here. This item comes to us on the occasion of Dr. Creer's 60-day notice that he is resigning, and what would otherwise be just hearing on how do we handle the recruitment process, which we'll hear from, but we also want to broaden that discussion to hear from Dr. Creer. So first we'll hear from Ms. Holmes.
Thank you, Chair, Commissioners. As you mentioned, I was asked to be here to discuss recommendations for the recruitment of a performance auditor initially. And as you are aware, that discussion looks to broaden for some other considerations. So first, just a few items. As you've mentioned, Auditor Creer has been with us since March, a little over a year ago, and he has complied with the terms of the contract with his 60-day notice to be effective September 17th, thus triggering this conversation. Thought it might be helpful, especially for a new board, if you had a little bit of a picture of the history of this position, because it's been around for a long time and has had a lot of different, I think, flavors and complexities to the people that have done the work, and then the gaps in between when the position has been filled as well. So this position was created in 1985 and has had 6 individuals with very different backgrounds, from financial to performance auditing, et cetera, while in the position. And then in between each of the recruitments, there were varying levels of vacancies that existed. So I hope I'm pronouncing this right, David Suchart? Suchart was in the position from 1986 through 1985, so I believe he probably held that the longest. Then it was vacant for 4 years, from 1995 to 1999. From there, it went to Dean Stevens for a couple of years, and then it was vacant for 10 months. Kay Blackburn held the position from 2002 through 2005. Then it was vacant for 14 months. Stuart Bollinger held the position for about 4 years, and then it was vacant for 2 years. Then, I'm imagining it was during the cycle of a lot of downturn with budget, the position was eliminated for 2 years, and then came back in 2015 for 2 years, held by Shanda Miller, and then it was vacant for 7 months until the recruitment for our current performance auditor, Creer. So again, just to kind of overview kind of the cycles with the position as well, for just to frame the conversation we're going to have today. I think as we roll into, you're aware, there's a board memo from Performance Auditor Creer to you. I just want to kind of put a broader context. While I've been asked to be here to talk about a recruitment process, and I'm certainly prepared to do that, I think within the context of the additional information provided, there are a variety of options for the board to consider. Certainly proceeding with the recruitment for this position. Second, proceeding with the recommendation that was presented in Performance Auditor Creer's memo to hire him back as a consultant. Third, if we're even considering something like that, another possibility could be to proceed with an RFP or an RFI to determine possible audit firms to provide this work for Lane County in a, variety of different options there. And then take no action at this time as we explore these in more detail, because it certainly merits all due consideration. So at this point, I'm happy to
discuss what a little bit about the recruitment process could be, or turn it over to have discussion on the memo that was provided from the board. Whichever is your pleasure.
Why don't we hear from Dr. Creer, and then we'll open it up to questions to both of you from the commissioners.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair, committee, board, habit. One of the things I was mentioning in this memorandum that I sent late last week was I had my monthly meeting with Commissioner Sorensen, and this was after I had announced that I'd be leaving to go pursue opportunities elsewhere. And he had the idea that, perhaps in the interim, maybe consider the possibility of doing a risk assessment, which was going to be approved, which had already been approved by the board a couple months back. And in the process of doing that risk assessment, that would then allow for the creation of the audit plan, which would structure the actual audit topics for the next 2 years at the very least. And based on the actual audit topics on that audit plan, you have more specificity as to the type of auditor you may or may not want to hire in the coming recruitment process. So y'all all have the memorandum. I emailed it out, so I won't rehash the whole thing, but it's a viable plan, and with the structure of the employment agreement that I have with giving 60-day notice, the future employers that I've been talking to and have had the offers from are willing to postpone the start date for me, to where if something like this would be something that y'all would want to consider, it's actually certainly doable and possible. So, but that just comes down to the board's decision. So, no harm, no foul either way. But Commissioner Sorensen said if nothing else, this could be a possibility to where the risk assessment would help take care of that and get it taken care of, have the audit plan, know what type of auditor you're going to want to hire based off of that audit plan. And then while the audit plan is taking place, a task force could be created. And again, the Performance Audit Committee formed a task force at the last, 2 audit committee meetings ago. There was some stipulation stuff that we had to do to get it cleaned up, but you could form a task force at the same time while the risk assessment is taking place that looks more into what are the actual needs and budget requirements that would allow this position to be more consistent in terms of mitigating turnover and allowing him or her, whoever comes into the office, to have a bit more sustainability. So those two, with the risk assessment and the type of audit and then the resources needed, those two results would end up coming together towards the very end, and then the board could make a decision, an informed decision as to what the next steps would be. So that's the quick summary. I won't rehash the whole thing. I know y'all have already had it. So that was more or less Commissioner Sorensen's idea. Correct me if I'm wrong, but that was his thought, and he asked me to come bring it forth to the board and bring it to consideration. Director Holmes and I talked about it was that last week? We talked about it last week, and she said, well, if that's the case and that's something that the board would want to consider, we'll talk it out. And then we had the agenda setting last week, and Commissioner Buck and Chair Sorensen brought it, Vice Chair Buck and Chair Sorensen brought it up, and here we are.
Okay, so we have a bunch of ideas here to kick around, and I would just like to say, for myself, I think we should move ahead with the recruitment. But having said that, I also think we should have our HR director explore with Dr. Creer the idea of having him beyond his current employment to help us do that risk assessment audit. That's the big thing on my mind. The prior performance auditor, Ms. Miller, as well as Dr. Casey, as well as the committee, identified the risk assessment audit as being, I guess, second most crucial. And I think that if we have a chance to get that done, we should try to get that done. So those are my thoughts. I'd like to make sure that all the commissioners have a chance to express themselves. Commissioner.
All right, so I have to do a little history. So forgive me a minute here. When I came on the board, this was an unhired position that was left open by previous board, and eventually we decided it was important as part of our initiative to try and become very transparent financially to the public, to restart this function of auditor. The board did. At that time, Howard Schuessler was our acting HR director, brought a couple options to the board. One was to hire a performance auditor that worked directly for the board, or to contract for performance audit work and have that work steered by a committee, an independent committee that was independent from the county administrator to maintain that independence of that function. We've gone through 2 performance auditors, including having 1 unsuccessful recruitment in between. And now I have some experience in looking at having the internal performance auditor that is a generalist that might know our organization versus the idea of hiring experts in subject matters to do audits. I've watched 3 expert audits go on internally as part of my work on the facilities committee and the technology management group. We did had an audit done of our technology our IT, or TIS. I always get mixed up because we switched the words. Yeah. But that was done by a subject matter expert that has done performance auditing for multiple government agencies around their information infrastructure. And it has been very useful, has saved us lots of money, made us more efficient. We did one of our fleet, similar, did an RFP, brought in an subject matter expertise, and it's been a very useful audit. We did the same with facilities. That, to me, seems to be a really efficient way of doing things. We do similar things when we're developing master plans. We don't pull a generalist out of somewhere in here to start developing a master plan. We put out an RFP and we hire people like TAC to do our homelessness look. We bring somebody in to do our solid waste master plan that's done for all over the country. That's sort of, we have so many specialized pieces of work we do. It's difficult for somebody to be that general. And I think my look at the past versus some of our experience, I actually am leaning towards not recruiting this position and moving to actually contracting this on a case-by-case basis. And then, I was a little surprised by the memo from Casey and the discussion from Chair Sorensen to direct contract the risk assessment. I think kind of is a little bit of an issue with transparency. That really should go out as an RFP. And we should look for, whatever firms and companies that might actually have expertise in risk assessments and balance that and have Casey compete with those other people rather than a direct contract. I just feel that's not transparent. So I have concerns about that. But, it seems to me we've been a lot more efficient. I don't know dollar-wise how much those 3 audits that I'm familiar with cost versus how much the one audit of our recruitment and retention cost. But my understanding, we actually did all 3 of those for less than what the recruitment and retention audit cost. So as far as efficiency for taxpayers' funds, which we were just talking about, our public trust around taxpayers' money and doing that, I strongly recommend that we not try and hire a generalist that works directly for us, and that we utilize our performance audit committee, which has some great people on it, and we actually solicit RFPs, or even RFQs from firms that might be interested in doing our risk assessment, and select a firm and engage a firm that way through the audit committee. And that's the way we should be doing this performance audit function moving forward.
Okay.
Commissioner Farr.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Dr. Kura, good to see you.
Yes, sir.
Ms. Holmes, I'm going to give a little bit of a different slant on history. I've been tapped to be a part of the current performance audit function from the very outset when we first began recruiting for the initial position. So I've been kind of integrally involved in how this has more or less evolved. And what I will say is we were exceedingly fortunate to attract Dr. Creer to Lane County when we did. It was fortunate for us that somebody with such high credentials, such high intelligence and breadth of ability to grasp concepts was attracted to come to Lane County. We were lucky that that happened. It fit right into your career development, and it fit very well into the direction we were trying to head at the time with our performance auditor. And the slight adjustment to the historical perspective on this, there have only been 2 people in this job, in the job of performance auditor. The past auditors have not been a performance auditor that reported to the board of directors. The board, we created the position in, I think it was 2014 that we first started talking about it. And it was because we were continuing to be, to overturn stones that had hidden information under them that caused us to recoil and react. And I remember stating at a board meeting, what's going to come next? Well, then Commissioner Stewart took that, what's going to come next, and said, well, why don't we try to figure out what's going to come next by evaluating the performance of the different functions of Lane County government. And so we began the discussion of how do we hire a performance auditor, not a fiscal auditor, not a financial auditor, not a internal auditor, but a performance auditor. And we went through a process that gave us a number of qualified candidates, and we selected Shanda Miller, who had worked for the Secretary of State's Department as an auditor, as a local government auditor. So we were once again fortunate in that the initial person in the job helped us to really define the position. We were fortunate in our second attempt to once again attract Dr. Creer. The first attempt brought us a recommendation of another local auditor with government experience who declined the job once we were preparing to offer the job. Well, it caused me to think quite a bit about why are local performance auditors declining to look at the job, and how did we back into Dr. Creer, which we basically did. I mean, what kind of a miracle was it that you happened to come to this organization? I really deem it as such. So that being said, I look at why would somebody move to Lane County or not move to Lane County to perform this high function for the Lane County government. And for one thing, if you look at the pay structure for the job, it doesn't really lend itself well to somebody who is living in Salem or living in Portland or Seattle or someplace locally who's been doing this work for a lot of years to come down here and relocate. It's not going to happen. So let's take a look at what my recommendation might be at this point in time. And it really is to take a look at the description of the position, including the pay scale for the position, and determine, do we need to have a Lane County performance auditor? Do we need that position for the future? Or can we, as Commissioner Bozievich has suggested, contract out for very specific items that we need to have audited, which we have a good rate of success doing that. And, I think that really, before we go out for recruitment at this point in time, I believe that that's a discussion that we need to have, and it's not going to happen between now and noon. So it's something that we really need to take a really good, hard look at the job that Dr. Creer has been doing. And prior to Dr. Creer, Ms. Miller, who sits on our Performance Audit Committee currently, and has a great deal of insight as to how this position works. So I think this is not a good time to make a decision as to how we move forward. I believe we need to talk significantly more about what it is that we want from the job, and do we, in fact, need a third employee reporting to the Board of County Commissioners? Or can audits, performance or otherwise, for the future be handled administratively under the jurisdiction of the county administrator? That's a discussion that we need to have. Can we afford to pay $200,000 and bring somebody from local government, or do we want to look at a different structure for this position? That, once again, is a discussion that we need to have, in my estimation. Thank you.
Okay. Commissioner Buck and then Commissioner Burney.
So as a new commissioner coming in, I always have thought of the performance auditor position really as a cross-check, somebody who's supposed to be checking on the county in general to make sure they're doing what they're supposed to be doing and doing it in an honorable way. And I always felt it to be a little bit awkward to have that person be an employee of the association that you're supposed to be auditing. When I think of a department to be audited, say parole and probation, I would think that we would want to see an expert in that field in public safety do the audit for that particular item. And depending on what the risk assessment comes up with and the list of ones to review, it would be different for each and every audit that's a potential for us to look into. And so for different reasons, I come to the exact same conclusion as Commissioner Bozievich in the way that I think it would be more relevant and be more impactful for a professional from outside the organization to be contracted in order to review the performance of any given department. And I also think that that should be a position that we give out an RFP for. And if that's something that you're interested in, please do apply, like just for objective, transparency and objectivity. So it's interesting, as somebody who's been around for a long time and seen everything that's gone on, and somebody who's new to the whole system, I just come up to the exact same conclusion. And I do agree that the committee needs to talk about that. And, they're very integral to what this position has become and why it is what it is and how to move forward. And so I would encourage the committee to take this up next and see if they come up to similar conclusions or have a variety of, maybe some different opinions on how that could be. But I'm not finding the same value in a position that reports to the board for an audit type of position that I would when you have an objective third party coming in and giving a conclusion who doesn't have a dog in the fight.
First off, I apologize that we've never had a chance to hang out.
It is okay.
I know it's my loss. And I also apologize for talking as if you're not in the room. That's a little awkward, but I'm going to. So in my business, when someone decided to leave, I gave them a 2-week check and asked them to leave. They obviously didn't want to be there. So I find it, and again, my apologies, but I find it odd. I can't wrap my head around the notion of having someone that is chosen to turn over being contracted with to mitigate the risk of turnover. That's just a hard one for me to wrap my head around. And so I end up coming to the same conclusions as Commissioners Bozievich, Farr, and Buck. I think that this is obviously problematic, and it obviously has a history, and I think we could gain insight from you in a different venue as to perhaps what some of those are. I would like that. But that's where I am. I agree with the other 3 commissioners.
So it sounds like we're not.
I'm sorry, it needs further study. That includes structure. That includes dollars. I think we need to be thoughtful. I'm sorry.
No, I'm sorry to cut you off. So I think that you both have heard the board discussion, and I think maybe what I'm hearing is it goes back to the committee to hear from the committee and the committee's perspective and take into consideration the comments of the commissioners, hear back a recommendation from the committee. Obviously, in Dr. Creer's remaining time with us, he can also offer his views to the committee or to the board or otherwise. But I think you've heard the discussion. Okay? Good. Thanks so much.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Guys, appreciate it.
Okay, so I am looking over our schedule here. I think we have been working through our agenda. I did want to know a little bit more about the executive session Timing, do you know anything about that, Mr. Mokrohysky?
I think we can do it this afternoon. It's just a brief item.
Okay, so we'll take that up some point this afternoon. There's no emergency business, is that correct?
Correct.
Correct? So that's the end of page 1. I think we'll leave county council until just prior to the executive session. At this time, I'd like to call on item 8C, county administration announcements, and Mr. Mokrohysky.
I just had one item, Mr. Chair. We had the Equity and Access Advisory Board met, I believe it was 2 weeks ago. They've been presented with a request from a group of residents for the Board of Commissioners ultimately to approve a resolution similar to what the City of Eugene did regarding hate bias and white nationalism. So they have a draft, and I just wanted to bring this to the board's attention that it's a discussion that's happening at the Equity and Access Advisory Board. I was there, and I suggested that, you know, we at least inform the board that this was something that they were going, that the advisory board was going to consider. They've reviewed the draft language, and I can share this with commissioners if you would like a copy of the draft. They expressed a desire to adjust some of the language. They didn't like everything that was included in what was presented to them. But the essential elements would boil down to, you know, currently states the Board of Commissioners supports Lane County being a welcoming, inclusive, and safe community for everyone who lives, learns, works, and plays here. We condemn hate, xenophobia, racism, white supremacy, white nationalism, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, homophobia, transphobia, ableism, sexism, and other forms of bigotry. The board recognizes the importance of elected officials responding publicly when groups or individuals experience hate and bias activities, and that the affected groups in the community feel supported. So that's the type of language. It also, this current version references recent state legislation, SB 577, that requires a system to track incidences of hate and bias and implement systems in conjunction with other jurisdictions. That's not a system we currently have in place, and you know, there would need to be considerations about what would it, if that was a recommendation that came forward to the board, what are the costs and staff implications and other pros and cons of implementing that here. But I just wanted to share with the board that that's a discussion. I can share the specific language again that's being considered, and any thoughts or comments that you have, I'd be happy to take those and relay them back to the advisory board, and know that at some point in the course of the next few months, that may be a recommendation that comes back to you, is to consider some type of language. This has happened in the past when we talked about the, we did a resolution, gosh, it was about a year ago, related to sanctuary cities. And I forget that the specific board order was that the board approved. We've done statements and policies regarding unity and similar type language that the board has previously supported. So happy to, I'm not sure if I can answer detailed questions, but it was more of an FYI at this stage, so you weren't caught off guard by that discussion in the future.
I'd appreciate a draft, because I'm just in the quick reading. Phobia is fear, something people can't control. Bias is a different thing. That's something they can control. And the language they're using around phobias is actually not accurate language. So I wouldn't mind suggesting some maybe updates to that language. You know, arachnophobia is fear of spiders. You know, some people have it, some people don't. But, you know, even people that are afraid of spiders may not kill them because they understand they control insect populations. You know, so they may not have a definitive bias, you know. There's a difference between a phobia and a bias. It's just bad language. Poor English, sorry.
Okay.
Along the lines of resolutions, we did, at our last meeting, have an ask from Oregon Recovers for a resolution. Is that one that you've taken a look at as well?
This was last week?
Right,
I was not here.
Yes.
I did hear that there was a presentation and a request for that. Did that end up on the board assignment list?
Not yet.
You're not, okay. So I'll check that at the break, and I can bring it up when we do a review of assignments and let you know where that's at.
If you check it out, they actually provided the resolution.
Okay.
The language is there.
I think Greg said something about it in assignments.
Chair and Commissioners, because that happened Tuesday evening after your full-day board meeting, we didn't have a chance to revisit that issue, so that assignment would be coming up here in the future to ask for your direction, and we've not received the head nods yet, other than most everyone spoke to that with favorability in the moment that evening.
So we'll bring that up at the end of the meeting under review of assignments.
And it is on my list of work session or agenda team requests because it wasn't brought up, but there seemed to be a lot of interest in having it brought up. Okay, thank you. Any other announcements you are?
That's it for me right now, unless you have questions on specific issues.
Okay, so let's do this then. We will come back at 1:30 to have our Public Works items, our executive session, our county administrator, our county council announcements, and of course, our commissioner business and review of assignments. That will be the conclusion of our workday. So we will be in recess until 1:30 p.m.